Welcome to the Amanita Podcast with your host, Christian Rasmussen.
I don't know what it is. I think it's mostly Hudson, but I feel like August has always been like one of my favorite months. It's a really like special month for me. And I think part of it, like it's definitely mostly Hudson, but then like I'm reflecting on it. There's something with the number 8. And then there's also something to that particular time of year, almost anywhere that I've lived. I love that time of year because it's like one of the hottest times of year. It's like really sunny and dry and hot in August. Yeah, I really like August, dude. August is dope. And it's our like harvest time too and stuff. And
the new season. And really it's for us in the business, the new year starts in like September. So it's like the end, it's like the closing out of the last year and beginning of the new year, which is cool.
What do you think it did to the K in particular? Because whenever y'all were doing that, it was interesting because me, Josh, and Jacob were all on 2C as well too. We had onboarded with 2C and spent like 2 or 3 hours in there. And then we took a bunch of more psilocybin mushrooms once we were a few hours into 2C. But yeah, no, we also had a really good time. And like me and Josh, we were talking about it. We kind of both just naturally fell into this place whenever we got there. We didn't know what we were going to take. We all kind of just brought some various medicines and stuff. We figured out when we got there. But me and Josh, like looked at each other and we're thinking about it and looking at what we had. And we're like, let's onboard with 2C and then we'll take a much larger dose of psilocybin. It was just so clear to us. So like, what do you think the 2C like did for the chronic ket?
You know, when we've talked about this before about how ketamine is almost like anchoring in the world, the energies of different dimension, almost like a dimensionality that like we can't even put into words or comprehend, as is like traditional tryptamines. But I feel like, I don't know, ketamine and dissociatives do it in a very particular way. And then like the tryptamine or phenethylamine, a different type of dimension, but more rooted in our current dimension, I suppose, maybe like a higher level of our current dimension, where like dissociatives are like a total, like it's like a different fucking dimension. And that's how it feels to me in a sense. And so it felt like it was like dimensions colliding, I guess. And part of the narrative and the story that was playing out was like this merging of Tara with us, with like the fusion of spirit and matter, and like, you know, other stuff that we've discussed, how like creation hasn't really happened yet. Like everything that we've experienced in the history of the universe is like the shadow cast back in time by the event, the moment of creation. And what I was being shown is like this moment of creation is when there was one and then there were two, and it was like God and Tara. And like this moment of real creation is when God and Tara merge again with the creation. And so like it's Tara infusing into everything that we have here, and it's adding another, or it's dimensions colliding and creating something that like our brains can't even fathom or comprehend what it is. So I was like shown all this and shown like my role in this and like, you know, what we're doing and blah, blah, blah. And it was just like adding another layer to this like biblical Christic, whatever story that, you know, we've been seeing play out in our own lives, but like adding a whole nother level to what that looks like, and like what the plan is or what the plan might be. I don't know. It could also just be a big fat delusion. I don't know, but it was very fun.
Yeah. Well, this thing that you were describing about God having this certain degree of separation to experience, you know, maybe Tara, right? Anytime I feel like that I've ever gotten to that place within my own mind or you know, thoughts around it, or even like insights or visions, whenever it's gotten to like that particular area, especially like the roots of that fractalization, right? Maybe like right at the very top, the roots of that fractalization, what comes to mind for me is this certain like magnitude of love, like what that had to be like for God to love Tara, for the first level of separation, that to bring Tara in. Like, what did that love? And what is that love? Do you know what I'm saying? Like, that has to be insane.
For real.
Yeah. And then like when your description too of the serotonergic realms compared to like the ketamine dissociative realms, what was like coming into mind for me when you were describing that is like, to a certain degree, ketamine has a little bit more of like this quantum feel to it. compared to the serotonergics, as if like though the serotonergics are another level of this game that is influenced by maybe the quantum, right? Like I know it's really kind of like getting out there.
That makes that's a good way to look at it. That makes sense.
Yeah, and like it's hard to articulate, but I feel like you're feeling what I'm like trying to articulate, and like experientially within the dissociative experience, there is sometimes this feeling of like the butterfly effect, or like heavy deja vu, or like morphing of that quantum field. They're interacting with that quantum field in a way that like only makes sense within there. You pick up what I'm putting down.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, well, and so dissociatives for me, they don't have, it's so interesting now that we're relating to things in terms of Tara, but dissociatives, they have a Tara feel for me, but they don't really, like any psychedelic has a very, very heavy Tara feel. So it was merging that feel through the 2CB into the ketamine whole experience, which was really interesting to like, she was infused in the experience, and that allowed me to learn a lot more and see things a lot differently. It was very Christic and biblical, like connecting to like, it was very, very biblical, which was really fascinating. Another interesting thing is Eric texted me yesterday morning when I was on the plane saying, dude, I just had a vision. He was like, I just learned something. And I was like, yeah, what's up? He said, Tara is merging with God soon. I was like, dude, that's that. Exactly. He had this vision on his own accord. Yeah. I was like, yep.
Oh,
exactly.
Dude. Like, have y'all had like this conversation you and I were just having?
I mean,
of like the fractalization.
Slightly, but not
okay.
Full. Yeah.
It's so interesting, dude.
Yeah.
And you, like Eric of all people, Eric of like almost most people, dude, I would trust like his sort of quote unquote channeling or insight or visions gifted from Tara. Do you know what I'm saying? Like I know for all his quirkiness, I do feel like he has genuinely cultivated a relationship with that deity. That's not inauthentic in any sort of way. Yeah, dude. Let's do this thing. Well,
let's go. We'll have to do whole conversations on Tara as well for this.
Yeah. I feel like we're going to get into it, but welcome everybody back to the Amanita Effect Podcast, a podcast and a platform for spreading the magic of Amanita. Today, I am your host, Gabriel Hardy. You are usually used to hearing my business partner, Christian, do the interviewing, but today I'm going to be interviewing him instead so we can dive into his story. Christian, how are you feeling about this today, brother?
Good. No, I'm just kidding. Yeah, no, I'm great. I'm excited for this. It's been something that I've wanted to do, we've wanted to do as a collective, as a team, outline my whole story, and we were able to do it really well with you in our first episode and get your story, but I've told bits and pieces here and there, but I have a pretty wild story, and I think people understanding that and feeling, well, first of all, like one of the things that we love about this business is that people aren't purchasing from a faceless entity, they're purchasing from me, and now they're purchasing from us. So people know me. There's like a personability, there's a relationship almost that's been fostered with every individual that purchases from us, and I want to bring that to the next level, and that's a lot of what this is. So a lot of it is to connect with the customer on a more intimate, deeper level. A lot of it's also like to see kind of the process and the mechanisms and the story that's led us to this point, which I think will hold a lot of benefit for everybody involved. So yeah, I'm excited and happy to do this. I like getting vulnerable, as you know, so I don't mind. I like talking about my shit.
Do.
Yes, I'm ready for it, and we'll see how in depth we can get today. But yeah, let's go.
Amazing. Yeah, and this thing you just said about it's sort of a core ethos and part of the branding and feel of our company and current vehicle is this personability and the connection that people have with you, right? And like, I think that this is going to be really dope because I think a lot of people feel connected to you, but I think a lot of people just know the surface level, honestly. You know what I mean? I think that they know a good amount, but I think the Christian that I've gotten to know over the past year, it's like, I know that as much as we try to, it's hard to encapsulate that within marketing segments or, a website page or whatever it is. It's also interesting because the business has just invested a good amount of money into sort of a death and rebirth and a reorientation of ourselves in the marketplace and some new marketing game plans. And it's funny, this really in-depth research, expensive research seems to point towards that's a really good strategy for us at the materialistic level too, of connect with the customer, connect with the individual and sell this story. Yeah, it's something that we've like intuitively felt since the beginning. It's just backed up by research now.
Yeah,
so,
the data backs our intuition for sure. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So let's dive into it, man. I want to start all the way at the beginning. I want to know little baby Christian, and then I want to know little kid Christian, and then I want to know teenager Christian.
Okay.
I want to know all the Christians.
We'll start with baby Christian. So I was born March 19th, 1990 at 11:55 p.m. in St. Paul, Minnesota. I'm in Minnesota right now, but not for long, which is really exciting. To my parents, Tom and Laura, I was the first child of three, so I'm the eldest, the older brother. I don't remember much from being a baby. I have one memory. I remember spitting up in my crib as a baby. I don't know if I've ever told you that, but I actually have a memory of being a baby and spitting up in my crib.
That's interesting though.
Yeah, it is interesting. It could be like a dream from when I was like a little older, and like I dreamt that I was a baby spit. I don't know. One interesting story from a baby that maybe plays into all this stuff. My parents would like take turns watching me at night. I don't know if I ever told you this story either. And my dad was watching me and we were downstairs and we was like watching TV or something and holding me. And all of a sudden he wakes up in bed and he's like, what the fuck? He freaks out. He's like, what happened? He didn't remember putting me to bed. He just woke up in bed. I wasn't there. And he runs and goes to my room and sees that I'm in the crib sleeping. He's like, okay. It's all okay. And he goes to shower. And when he gets out of the shower, he starts shaving. And he's shaving. And as he's shaving, he notices he has 3 dots on his neck in the shape of a triangle. And he's like, that's strange, but he didn't think too much of it. And until he was feeding me or dressing me or something, and he saw that I had the exact same 3 dots in the exact same spot on my neck. So that's an interesting story. Yeah, the implications, I don't know. Who knows? Who knows what happened?
Dude. First of all, hold the fucking phone. I want to get into the rest, but we gotta pause just briefly for this show right here. This is crazy. How have I known you as long as I have? How have we talked as many hours as we have? And you may have told me this at some point, but I don't think I would have forgot it. This is crazy. Yeah. So the 3 dots, what does this signify to you?
Oh, I have no idea, man. I don't know. I mean, like, it's maybe we got abducted or like, I think it, I have like personal relationships almost with these entities, like lots of entities, as we've talked about this. And like some of them are, alien. I mean, like, it wasn't, what was it, like 8 months ago? I think I told you this story where there were 4 beings in my room, like on the posts of my bed. I didn't tell you the story. I definitely told Eric. There were like 4 super tall blue beings, and they're not like there in the physical. Like I can't reach out and touch them, but I can see them in my mind's eye. So there's like a male and a female at the head of the bed, and a male and a female switched at the tail of the bed. And they were doing all this crazy stuff to me, and they were like tuning up my energy field, similarly to how it's like on DMT. They like program your aura and put light nodes and codes and stuff in there. Mm-hmm. I'm trying to remember the whole story, but one of them, they released all this stuff from my solar plexus. And, like I have this health stuff and like, we'll get into that, I'm sure. But they released all this stuff from my solar plexus. I'm going to butcher the story a little bit. I have it written down in my journal, but this like entity came out, this like demonic entity or like a dark negative entity. And it was like angry, that it got pulled out. And they were just like super like calm and loving and like just doing their work. And it was like outside my window, like wanting to get back in. And they told me, they were like, just love it. And so I did, I loved it. And it like ran off. And then like, it couldn't, I couldn't do it anymore. And then they brought in all these, and this is sober too. Like I was sober doing this. I might've been on like a gram or 2 of Amanita, but then they brought in all these like, or allowed all these like Dementor-esque beings to come in. So like, I can see this all in my mind. There's like hundreds of these beings, you know, like coming in, not really trying to get at me, but watching what was going on. And they were like, just love them. And I did. And as I loved them, some of them ran off and some of them were scared. Some of them stayed there and kind of like watched and resisted it a little bit. But some of them turned into little sparks of light, and they shifted, you know. That is like, that love allowed them to free themselves from that negative whatever. And then, that was there's a lot more that happened that I would have to look at my journal to remember. But so the reason that I tell this story, well, I mean, it's a cool story, but like, and then they like continued to do stuff when I fell asleep and whatever. But I have these relationships with these entities. They've been growing over the years, and of course Tara, and like we'll get into all that. I don't know what happened. I wouldn't be surprised if something physical did happen in that moment. I wouldn't be surprised. I have other experiences in which, like, one time I was in the same room. There was this was maybe a couple years ago, a few years ago. I physically saw this thing, this blue ball of light, not that big, maybe like the size of a tennis ball or something, was like zipping around my room, and it was like real. Like I saw it, and then like I woke up next morning and it was like, that was strange. And like, I thought to myself, like, I wonder if something actually happened that I don't remember, you know, after that. So I don't know. Yeah.
I really honed in on it for a lot of reasons. I mean, 3 stuck out to me, that holy trio, like all the things that clicked, but also this experience of the 3-dot marking as a baby and your dad even being involved. I'm sure that's a really trippy story to share with him. And like, you know, I'm sure he himself was a bit like, there is this trend that I've noticed, this commonality in lots of people. A lot of mystical people report this. Albert Hoffman reported this, the inventor of LSD. But my buddy Jake's doing a whole series on something similar to this. But yeah, people report that in childhood having these, and it comes in a variety of different flavors, but in childhood having some of these like sort of mystical experiences, these introductions to the spirit world, these shamanic initiations sometimes, if you will. And like I said, it looks like a variety of different things. For me, it was visions, voices, and even like a form of kind of like astral traveling that I would do in my bed at night.
Yeah.
But it's also interesting because another commonality that I noticed in this thing with people who report this is that at some point, not all the time, but it's most people, it's like at some point they somewhat lose it. And a lot of times they start to regain it back. It's like within adulthood. And it's this whole journey of regaining it back. You know what I mean? But especially in Western society, it's like at some point, it almost gets like bred out of us. You know what I mean?
Yep.
So 3 dots, baby.
Yeah.
Tell me more about little Christian.
It almost feels like little Christian was at some points in time. I feel like it was a different Christian. Like not like it was like I like the whatever's embodying me now walked in to this being like after 13, 14. But I don't know. That's just, I don't know. Because like, I don't remember much, you know, like I really don't remember much from my childhood. And I'm sure everybody kind of feels this way. It feels like it's like a different life. I was extremely loving, always very, very loving. Like I was put into daycare and like as a, not necessarily newborn, but 2 months old or whatever. And I was put in the same crib as Phil. Phil's like, you know, my closest friend here in Minnesota. And so we have this like really, really tight bond. But as Phil and I grew up, you know, I always like wanted to hug him and kiss him and like I was just very, very loving and outgoing and open and could make friends anywhere. And I was very happy. And I had great parents, wonderful parents, born into a really, you know, well-off family. My sister came along at 3. Emily, she's fantastic. My brother came along when I was 7. I was in public school for the first couple years of my life. I remember I liked it. I had friends. I did well in school and teachers liked me. The day in first grade when a teacher came up to me, or maybe it was the principal, and came up to me and was like, so you're not coming back to this school next year, right? Or something like that. Like I found out that I was moving schools, not from my parents, from like a teacher or the principal at school. And that fucked me up. And then I went to private school, and private school was, you know, I went to St. Paul Academy, which is the most, you know, it's the premier prep school here in Minnesota. It's like, you know, top of the line, super, super high education for, you know, for kids. That was fine. Like I was, you know, extremely smart, top of my class. In second grade, for instance, my teachers would give me assignments to do above and beyond the classwork because I got so bored with it. So like, I don't know if I've ever told you any of this. So like, I learned to spell anti-disestablishmentarianism in second grade. And then like I found that there were other words that you could spell that were even longer that nobody's heard of, like pneumonar ultramicroscopic silicovolcanoconiosis, or there's a handful of them. So I learned to spell these, and like my teachers would give me like a box of Mike and Ike's or whatever, do like crazy math stuff. And, I was doing like derivatives and proofs in like sixth, seventh grade. So like really, really high level mathematics. I lost most of that. That's the DXM. We'll get into that in a little bit, but they closed the door to some of the educational academic smart and opened the door to some other stuff. But everything was fine. Like life was cool. I got into karate. I got bullied in public school in kindergarten and first grade. Me and my friend Vince, we both got bullied by this guy. And so we decided we were going to do karate. So we got into karate and we ended up beating him up one day. That ended it all. Well, he was picking on us, and I don't even think I hit him. I think Vince like kicked him or something, and he like stopped picking on us after that. So karate was a big part of my life. Became a black belt as a teenager, and second degree black belt by the time I was 15, and I was a karate teacher. We can get into that a little bit as well. I did some sports, but yeah, I was just kind of like a normal kid who just like was really smart and was really, really loving. It all started to unravel in middle school, which I think is typical for a lot of people. Fifth grade, I started getting picked on. So, I was at a super prep school, like preppy kids, preppy parents, like, the wealthiest in Minnesota type thing. When I was in elementary school, I fit in with the kids, but as kids grow up and they start to take on, other things from their day-to-day life, like I just didn't mesh with a lot of the children there. And I started getting picked on a lot. And I was always very loving and very much wanting love from others. So, as that started happening, I started like losing a lot of confidence and self-respect. And it turned into this feeling of like not being lovable, There's one story this is at the old house, so it must have been like 9 or 10. I was just crying. And I don't know why I was crying. I don't know if there was a reason that I was crying that I knew of. I was just crying, and I was crying and crying and crying. And it went on for hours. And my dad was at work and my mom was there. She didn't know what to do. Like, she had no idea. Like, our parents are just kids trying to raise kids. Like, you know what I mean? Like, she had no idea how to deal with it. And in hindsight, like, all I needed for her was to, like, sit down with me and hug me and hold me and, like, tell me it's okay. Like, it's okay to feel sad. Like, you're okay. You're okay as you are. I'm here for you. I love you. That's all I needed. That's all anybody really ever needs, ever. She didn't know that. And she was trying to fix me, and she was trying to fix it, and like, it wasn't working. And she got frustrated, and eventually she got overwhelmed and she started crying. And I remember very vividly when this happened, and I like stopped and just like looked at her, and she realized like what was happening. And immediately she snaps out of it and she goes, "Do you want me to buy you some Pokemon cards?" And I was like, "Yeah, please." And so like we went and got Pokemon cards, and like that was it. It was the end of it. And it's an interesting story because I think that set the tone for it. It like taught me a lot. It taught me, and this is something that we all learn, emotions can be used for manipulation. It's huge. Like, I mean, that's a huge facet of most people's lives. Maybe not most people, but a lot of people's lives. And it certainly was for my story growing up. And then it also taught me a lot about my parents, and what it ingrained in me then was like the seed of addiction, like Pokemon cards, getting something materialistic, physical, completely, shifted my mentality and made things okay again. Maybe a couple years later, maybe like 6th or 7th grade, I was overwhelmed. Don't remember why. I was crying. I was freaking out. Like, I started to get really like overwhelmed with like grief and sadness, and like feeling like I wasn't, involved, or like I didn't belong, which I think is a consistent story probably with a lot of the people that will be listening to this. I was super overwhelmed and crying, and I didn't know what to do about it. And there was this clock next to my bed, this like big circle clock with a glass covering on it. And I grabbed it and I punched it, and the glass broke, and it got all in my hand, and my hand started, gushing blood down my wrist. And like immediately I stopped crying, immediately. And I just looked at the blood, and there was this like euphoric numbing that came over me. And it's probably like 6th grade. And my parents came in and like saw it, and they like went and washed my hand and stuff. And I was just numb, and it felt so fucking good to be numb. that obviously comes into play later. So then 7th grade rolls around and like there's more issues at school. There's one girl in particular who like just like had it out for me, I guess, or like it must have been some past life stuff, because like we were just like, we butted heads and I liked her, and a bunch of stuff happened that like I got humiliated basically in front of the class, and you know, it really started messing with me. And then Alana came into the picture. Or Alana and I had been friends this whole time too, but Alana became best friends, and her and Ellery, this other girl, were very close. Alana was also going through a similar thing, like kind of spiraling and descending into this darkness and this chaos. And so we lifted each other up through this. Essentially, we also like really perpetuated one another's problems. And like, so she started cutting, and then like I started cutting, and that turned into anorexia for me, which turned into, you know, like I didn't feel like I deserved life, really. Like I didn't feel like I deserved life. There was also, you know, now looking back on it all, it was also like consistently a cry for help. Like I just wanted love from people. Like I wanted to feel accepted and belonging. It led to like suicide attempts, but like really, were they really suicide attempts, or was it just a way for me to try and find that love externally? Like, I don't know. Some of them were kind of serious, but it never ended up happening.
I don't mean to cut you off. I want to continue on the timeline here, but I want to revisit something real quick. So I'm getting a feel for it. Got to know little Christian a little bit, and like some visioning that in my head. And then here we're kind of where we're at right now, where things have picked up. There's been a shift, and there's also been some behavior changes and personality changes and some things like that, some darkness that's crept in, you know, from the innocent childhood years. But you describe this like sort of like radical shift that happened like right around like the middle school time, where it seemed like before that it was good. There wasn't, you know, a whole lot to, but like right around that time, like middle schoolish, there's like this radical shift. And you described that you weren't fitting in with the other children, and simultaneously something that you had kept since you were a small child is the strong emotions, both positive, probably positive and good, you know. But it feels like the container that you were handed for such a long time bred this like overwhelming positivity where you were swinging on that end of the pendulum. Now there's been this radical shift where there's like the swinging back to the opposite end of the pendulum because you feel so much. It's like it's shitty, so you feel that really hard. It feels really shitty. But like, I'm curious, man, within that though, the fitting in with other kids and not feeling, like, can you dig deeper into that? Like, I'm really, really curious, you know? Do you feel like it was sort of like more than that? What do you think, dude?
It all started with like getting made fun of and stuff, you know, and like being humiliated in front of it's interesting though, like that would happen, and I still had my friends, and like it didn't really affect anything except for like my own personal feelings. And to say that I really didn't fit in, I don't know if that's even correct, but that's really how it felt to me. I think that I was inherently different though. I am inherently, that's just who I am, you know, I am. When you're a child, you're not like self-aware fully. You're not really self-aware. You're just kind of like going through the motions and being yourself. I think the more self-aware I got, the more I realized how different I was, and the more afraid that I became, particularly with, you know, starting to get, you know, picked on or whatever, the more afraid I became of like losing my role or my place in that little ecosystem society that we had built up in that school. So I think a lot of it was probably fear and anxiety. I guess I would have to dig into that a little bit more. It's a good question.
You describe a little boy who was coming into middle school, like all of that backlog. Like it sounds like very loving. Sounds like he's also described this sort of ease of making friends. You had good relationships, but also you're wicked smart. You know what I mean? You could see that. I mean, you advanced really quickly. Also came from, you know, a wealthy family. It sounds like your parents loved you and stuff like that. Do you feel like there was a lot of like pressure at all? At what point did you like start to feel, because with a certain level of self-awareness, there's like something that for everybody along the path of their childhood where that starts to kick in, some level of like pressure of becoming something or doing something with their life. When do you feel like it started to kind of kick in for you, man? Was it like a lot of pressure for you?
That's an interesting question too. I don't think that I really got much pressure from my parents. I think that the pressure was internal pressure, and it's back to that, like, it was the pressure that I instilled on myself to fit in. I think it started seeing what it would be like if, like, I wasn't loved. I think the pressure was like mounting to, like, ensure that I fit this mold so that people would love me. And then this mold, the mold itself evolved over time, but that mold, like, I stayed in that fucking mold until a couple fucking years ago, you know, like, truthfully. And we all kind of do this to an extent, you know, but I think I created this ego, this persona for myself that, like, or this box that I thought that I needed to be in. It changed a lot. And we'll get into this as we get into teenage years more, and like my 20s and stuff. It changed a lot over time, but believing that if I allowed myself to just be me, it was going to turn people off. And, like, the truth is, like, I'm a polarizing person in many senses, like, and I don't really turn anybody off these days, but I think a lot of it was fucking Ellery, dude. A lot of it was Ellery, because it's just that there's this one person who just fucking hates me. And, like, for no reason at all, she just hates me. And I loved her, you know, like, as much as, like, that 12, 13-year-old kid can love another girl. Like, I love a girl. Like, I loved her, and she fucking hated me. And I think, you know, we've talked about this as I've, like, come to this and realized that, like, you know, my core shit, like, stems from Alana and Ellery. Like, I think that's really what a lot of it was. And I realized that, like, because I started thinking and believing that, like, if I'm me, like, people are going to hate me. And I'm not going to get what I need out of that. And, like, I just want to be accepted and fit in. And, like, because really, again, like, it wasn't like I was picked on a little bit and stuff, but, like, I had a place, you know, but she hated me, dude, for no reason. And I mean, maybe, I'm sure if you asked her, I'm sure there were some reasons. So, like, I created this box that I had to exist in. And initially, when I created that box, I hated the parts of myself that were outside of that box. I hated them. I hated myself. And so inside that box, it was suffering, and it was, you need to suffer, and you need to make yourself suffer. You need to cut yourself. You're not allowed to eat food because you don't fucking deserve it. And again, yeah, that box shifted over time. But yeah, I mean, I think this is kind of, it's therapeutic for me again, this too, because it's true. Like, I haven't really told this story in this depth in a long time.
I feel like as kids, like, the feeling of self-worth or, like, self-esteem, it's, for most kids, it's kind of this, like, there, like, it's like, as long as the parameters are mostly okay, they can play shit like that, you know, like, for a lot of kids, like, it's there, the self-esteem, you know, it's not a huge issue yet. But then, like, typically it is around, like, these teenage years, like middle school, high school, where the self-esteem thing does become a lot more complicated for people. And there's, like, this, for most people, I think at that level of human development, like that age, the self-esteem thing is a lot revolved around the ego. It almost has to be, because, like, of the level of intellect that you have at that age, you know what I mean? Like, it is about who I am and, like, how I present, and how the peers at school with me every day reflect that. Like, that is that is for a lot of kids, and that can become, and just where you see, like, a lot of, like, the tragic kids who unalive themselves and get really trapped into the bullying cycle, and it can become really, really dark and go to the most extreme edge. And I think it is because, like, and I reflect back on myself as, like, a middle schooler and, like, a young man in, like, high school, and it's like, with my level of awareness, for a very long time, it was this, like, do people think I'm cool? You know what I mean? Do other people like me, and things like that? It was really, really important. And I think for most healthy people, later on, it becomes a healthier orientation of your self-esteem, and realizing, like, it's a lot more than just that. And it's, you know, what I can contribute to the world, and all these things, right? And it's like, I can see how, like, at that age, with the self-esteem being oriented around just that, you know what I mean? Like, I could see if that's not hitting, you know, shit gets really dark. And you don't have that light to see yet.
Right. Yeah. And, you know, you said it, like, I've always been extraordinarily sensitive, like, unbelievably sensitive. And, like, now that sensitivity, it doesn't affect my emotional state. I don't let it, because I've learned and I've grown, and it's a huge asset at this point. Like, I can feel things, you know, like, that's a really wonderful gift to have. And it was a gift all along, but it made for my corrections, like it made my corrections way more extreme. So that box that I created for myself was like about as extreme as you can get in that scenario. You know, like I made it as dark as I possibly could because that's how I felt. Like, you know, the negative emotions were so extreme, just as the positive emotions are and have been for me. And that's, you know, learning to walk the middle way and be rooted in the dark and, you know, moving towards the light.
So it sounds like there was the beginnings of like the tragic stage in which, you know, you were feeling heavily these emotions, these negative emotions in the shadow. And you described this experience of realizing that there was certain modalities available to you, even though it wasn't necessarily the healthiest one, a very healthy one, but one of them that you found was pain and this ability to sort of this pattern of trying some way to numb out the pain or escape the feelings, you know. But I'm like curious, when did that progress from being, you know, self-harm physically to like things like drugs and other ways? Yeah, when did the kind of like this psychoactive journey start for you?
Yeah. So that's the next leg of the story. The cutting, and there's still a little bit more to this first era, we'll say. The cutting continued to progressively get worse. And then when I ended up in the psych ward, they called it depression-induced psychosis. And they're like, this is actually like extremely rare. You were so depressed that your brain started to rewire itself and you started going psychotic. I honestly don't know what is real and what's not in this story because in high school, I started telling stories. I became a storyteller and I exaggerated or twisted, or I don't quite know what actually happened and what didn't during this time period. You know, like the cutting was getting bad, like really bad, like needing stitches every night, like should have been getting fucking stitches. You know, my arm is all cut up. I have the word bleed carved into my arm. I don't know if I've ever showed you this scar, but bleed is carved into my arm. I have a scar of bleed. And like the story that I started telling people in high school, and I'm not sure if it's true or not, was that in my mind, there were demons holding me down and carving bleed into my arm. That's the story that I told people. I don't know if that's true or not, but other stories that I started telling people was that there was like a boy that lived in my closet who wore a loincloth and that's it, and was like beaten and bruised and like malnourished and super pale. And we would communicate and he would, you know, tell me things and share me things. He had like ran away from his house because his parents were abusive and blah, blah, blah. I really don't know if I actually experienced that or if that was just a story that I told later on. I'm not sure.
This storytelling and these couple of examples that you just gave me here, man, I'm really curious. Like, and I know, and I think I know you're being honest when you say like, I don't fully know, because memory is such a shoddy thing for basically everybody, especially when you're like willing to admit like that was a time in my life in which like I said some lies and told some stories and stuff. They've settled into a place where like some of it was story, some of it was true, some of it was true and exaggerated a bit. I'm sure there's like a spectrum, but like, I don't know. Do you think maybe it was all true? Do you think there's an element of you that has to present it in that way sometimes? Because something that I've had to shed a little bit over the past year or two and diving into my own story in childhood and trying to dissect that and be honest with myself about it and be honest with others about it is I have to be honest about some of these things, like I've told you, like the voices and the visions and things like that. And there's been times when I've like felt a bit psychotic just admitting that to myself or admitting that to others. You know what I'm saying? And so I'm not saying that's what you're doing. You're defensively saying I was a storyteller. Like, yeah, do you think like there's an element of that involved?
Here's what I think. There's still more to the story leading up to that, but time is fluid. History is fluid. This is something that we talk about a lot. The past is not concrete. The way that I kind of see it is the Christian that was moving through that, the Christian that actually experienced that, I don't think I actually experienced that stuff. I think that they were stories that I told. I think that if you were to follow the timeline back, I think that the timeline that I'm on now, I think that this Christian actually did experience that stuff. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So I think
Yeah,
that the stories like shifted the time, and then looking at it, it's like Schrodinger's cats, but it's like, which one do you want to look at? You know, like it could be one or the other.
Well, let me ask you.
Yeah.
Yeah, with this concept of if it wasn't what my past self actually experienced, it's what my current self experienced to make all this shit make sense. Like in the vein of that, have you ever noticed any sort of level of deja vu involved with some of these occurrences and like things from your childhood? I ask because I heard this thing the other day that sometimes these instances of deja vu, it's like a hint at the quantum. It's like, hey, this shit feels like we've been through this before, because like you kind of somewhat had, but we just had to rearrange shit a minute ago to make this shit make sense. So that's like, that's a recent explanation of deja vu that I heard, and I thought it was very interesting. And I was reflecting back on a lot of my own deja vu moments. And so like I posed this question to you, like, and you might have to like think about it for a minute, but like, have any of these kind of experiences that you had throughout childhood or your teenage years, the kind of psychotic / mystical / whatever, has there been any sort of deja vu around that as you've gotten older?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. And particularly when I got off benzos. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. I don't know if I can put any experience to, I don't know if I can relate any specific experience, but yeah. And that's like, time is cyclical, right? And like, so what the period when I was a kid lasted 2-3 years, maybe, that initial thing. And then that maybe 2 years. I feel like it was the same point on the time spiral as getting off benzos. But benzo, the spiral grows as you grow up. The benzo, the more recent dark night of the soul was like a 5-year ordeal, you know. But yeah, in that sense, there's deja vu. And then there's there for sure. I don't really know. I can't put any experience. I can't relate anything specifically, but sure. Back to the story, because I'd like to get into the next part. Eventually, my parents got concerned about my weight, and they brought me to the hospital. And, you know, I would wear those cuff things, you know, like things to cover my wrists and stuff, or like wear long sleeves and put my thumb through the hole. I was all like emo. So like nobody saw my wrists and stuff. Although kids at school knew. A few kids knew. Like I would fucking cut in the bathroom at school, you know, like they brought me to the hospital, and the doctors saw the cuts, and they're like, you really need stitches, but these are like too closed up at this point. And I weighed 90 pounds and I was 5'10" or 5'11", like super, super, like deathly ill, deathly skinny. And they committed me to the psych ward. And the psych ward was really interesting. I was there, Fairview 4B here in St. Paul. I was there for a couple weeks, and I met a lot of really, you know, interesting people, of course, being like a 13-year-old kid in the psych ward. And I found relatability in the people there. Like, I belong in a sense, you know. And just then, like, I didn't realize that at that point in time, but looking back, like, that started to ease I don't think it was any of the therapy or like, I mean, to be perfectly honest, I'm sure that helped a little bit, but like, you know, my parents would come and play cards with me, and like there was this tremendous amount of like love and acceptance, and like finally they saw what their son had been, you know, hiding. Like finally I was exposed, and like people saw me, and I belonged in this center. And there's a handful of really interesting, crazy stories from there, but I ended up getting out and getting into outpatient treatment. And outpatient, so it's, you know, intensive ILP intensive outpatient treatment. So every day in the morning you'd go there, and then you'd leave in the afternoon, basically like a school day. And that's when drugs came in, because there were kids in there that were using drugs, and nothing crazy, drinking and alcohol. It started to make me really excited, you know. I was just like something new, something different. And so I remember the first like drug or something that I did. It was probably weed. Yeah, I got some weed from some kid in the psych ward and like smoked it in my room at night. And it was fucking awesome. It was amazing. You know, I had like a Kundalini thing. Like I remember like laying in bed and having
turned on Kid Cudi.
You know, no, I listened to like The Bled and like a bunch of like you know, like screamo back then. That turned into like punk and blah blah blah. But I was always super fascinated in music. Like I would lay in bed and listen to music and think about like how they wrote that song and the song structure, and like, yeah, it was just always super fascinating to me. That'll come into play later. But yeah, I was lying in bed, and there's this like this like ball of light was going up and down my spine, and it hit my root and then it'd go up to my head, and it just like felt so orgasmic. I've never had that experience with cannabis, the one time, but it like opened up a bunch of stuff, it was awesome. I was in it, dude. And like, that was it, I was like, this is what's going to save me, and in all honesty, like drugs fucking saved me. They did. Drugs saved my life. Like they really did, but they propelled me down a path of false light. In that sense, I didn't know what I was getting into. I didn't know how to do it properly. I didn't understand. Although I was very spiritual still, like at this age, like I'd been spiritual my whole life. Like I didn't see the spiritual side of what I was doing at this point. It was just like something that made me feel better and made me feel like I belonged. And that was the real big thing. Like, so I got out of the psych ward and I got into public school, and like, I didn't have an identity at this point, like I didn't know who I was. I didn't have an identity at all. So I formulated it. Just like we can all formulate our identity and our personality. Like we have characteristics that will come through no matter what, but like personality is really up to us. Like we all choose who we're going to be in a sense, with like a blueprint that's kind of guiding it. I chose a personality that revolved around drugs. Like I became the burnout, and I started just like in middle school, like over exaggerating like my depression, which made it worse, like so that I could get more love or whatever, because I was so sensitive. I over exaggerated my drug use, or my I turned myself into a burnout. And it was also a rejection and rebellion from like being the smartest kid in class and blah, blah. Although I was still like one of the fucking, I was in AP classes and blah. I didn't do any fucking work because I'd already done all this stuff in middle school. Like I didn't have to do any work, and I got A's or whatever, but I turned myself into this burnout. And so like I started, drinking when I could and smoking weed, and Robitussin came into my life there. I think it was Alana that told me about Robitussin probably when I was in Outpatient. So I started doing that really, really quickly. And Robitussin was amazing. Like I fucking loved it. I don't know. I don't even know how to explain what it did for me, but it opened me up to a whole new realm of existence, right? Like any psychedelic or dissociative does. And I did a lot of Robitussin. Like I did hundreds and hundreds of bottles over those 2 years before I ended up in treatment.
Give people a quick rundown on what Robitussin is in case they don't know.
Yeah. So Robitussin contains dextromethorphan, which is a dissociative similar to ketamine, PCP, NMDA antagonist. It's a strong dissociative. It also has strong serotonergic properties, and it's a really unique dissociative. Nothing's quite like it. It's also really dark. It has a darkness to it that you don't get with ketamine or PCP. It's got this this innate like dark aspect and quality to it, which was perfect for me as this like child that just like came out of this really dark time. And now granted, it was still a really, really dark time. Like I wasn't cutting, I wasn't suicidal, maybe a little bit suicidal, but like it wasn't like fucking sunshine and rainbows. Like it was still a really dark time. I did end up cutting at camp like a year when I was like 14 or something. I went to camp and I cut myself, and somebody walked in when I did it, and they had to like send me home and stuff, and it was like a relapse or whatever. But I did it because I didn't feel good there. I didn't feel like I belonged or fit in. Like I felt like such an outcast. But yeah, so did Robitussin like twice a week. I started like, staying up all night twice a week and drinking a bottle or two, and then going to school, like still kind of tripping.
Yeah.
That was fun.
The afterglow.
And, yeah, the afterglow, no sleep in school. Then I started doing pills and, anything that I could get my hands on, whether it was like, I did a lot of Adderall. I did a lot of like Vicodin, Percocet, Oxys, opiates. And I did a little bit of benzos, but not much. I did meth for my first time at like 15 or 14. And I'm trying to remember like some stories of being in school. One of them, so like I mentioned, I was in karate, and I was still like very much an outcast in school. Like I was the burnout. Like I would walk around the halls like with my mouth open and like my eyes, like just because it was like a persona. Like I didn't need to do that. It was this persona that I like put on myself. I like made myself into a burnout. One day this like jock dude, his name was Adam. We're in the locker room after gym, and he was trying to get me. And keep in mind, like I was a black belt at this time. Like I knew how to fight, but I didn't fight. I didn't want to fight. Oh, another fun story. Well, I don't know if get into that, but I didn't. The only other time I had ever like utilized karate outside of karate was in the psych ward when this dude was like picking on. He just came in and he was picking on all the girls And I was like, dude, shut the fuck up, you know? And he like gets up and is all huffy and he starts running towards me and all the counselors like grab us and hold us back. And he broke through, but they were holding me back. So I like turned and kicked him in the throat and he fell down and I got a needle in my ass and woke up in a fucking, you know, jumpsuit or whatever. So that was the only time
That's so gangster, dude. That's a ninja moment, dude, because it's like, what's the ninja like code? The ninja code is we hardly ever fight, but we train our entire lives for that moment when we got to throat kick a motherfucker in the psych ward. You know what I mean?
Exactly. Get him. Yeah. So, but like, so this guy in high school was in like 9th grade or something, was trying to get me to fight my friend. And I was like, no, I'm not going to fight him. He's like, I'm going to beat the shit out of you if you don't. And I was like, fine, you know, do it. And he did. And I didn't fight back. And like, he beat the shit out of me. And that was shitty, you know, like for my self-esteem. But I also like, I was becoming a pacifist, like strong, like pacifist. And like, I was going like really left. I was part of this like the anarcho like mentality. So that was a traumatic moment, you know. And eventually I started selling weed in school and Adderall and pills and stuff. And it didn't last long. I was selling for maybe a few months. And one day we were out, you know, smoking weed before school, and we got there a little bit late. And this day they happened to have like somebody waiting for everybody that was coming in late to bring into the principal's office. Not something that they usually did. And they bring me into the principal's office, and I had like an ounce of weed bagged up and a bunch of Adderall on me. And they fucking searched me and they called the cops, and I ended up getting arrested and getting, you know, expelled from school. And I went to JDC, and they were like trying to come down on me. They're selling at school. I mean, like, you know, they were looking at me like they were trying to get me to go away for like a couple years or a year or something, which is really shitty for a teenager, you know. It ended up, I was in JDC for like a couple weeks, and that was really interesting because there, like, I got caught selling drugs, you know, like I was kind of cool in there. Mm-hmm. And like, I kind of fit in with these like hood dudes, these hood kids. Like I understood it. Like I got them. I fit in with them, and they like thought I was cool, and I was like good at basketball. So we played fucking basketball, and I'd like, you know, they always had two teams, the good team and then the shitty team, and like, or two sides of the court that they'd play. And they would always pick me really early to go play on the good team. And like, it was cool. Like I fit in, I kind of liked it. My parents got a good lawyer. And another thing with all this is too, like we're in Florida one year, and my dad was like, I don't remember exactly how this happened, but when I get back from Florida, I go into the room to find my weed to smoke, and like, it wasn't there. And I was like digging through the trash cans and stuff, and my dad comes up and he was like, "Are you looking for something?" I was like, "Fuck." You know? And they were really strict about this stuff. Like they did not want me doing this. And this ties into the story earlier on. Like my dad, he wanted to fix it. He wouldn't allow it, and he wanted to fix it. What are you to do with your kid? And so like, you know, my dad and I started really getting into it a lot, and that was really hard on him, really hard on me as well. But it also added to this, like, my parents don't think that I'm okay the way that I am. You know, I felt isolated from them, and that grew and grew and grew. Really, again, until like the past like 5 or 6 or 7 years. That's a big narrative in the story that I have. But yeah, and then so like they grounded me for like a month. I think I didn't get to see anybody. That happened twice prior to getting arrested. But finally, yeah, I got arrested and went to JDC, and then ended up great lawyer, and she got them to settle with, I have to go to Hazelden and then do whatever. Hazelden's like a really well-known treatment center in the whole country, but it's here in Minnesota. And then I have to do whatever they recommend afterwards. And so I went to Hazelden, and I fucking hated it. I didn't want to be sober. They recommended me to go to Grey Wolf Lodge, which is a halfway house in Washington State, in like Port Townsend, like top, like, you know, northwestern corner of Washington State, beautiful area. And it was interesting. It was cool. They would do these 10-day backpacking trips, which I loved. Like it was great, but I didn't want to be sober. I wasn't happy. Like I just wanted to get it done so I could get back home and start doing drugs again. That was really it. But these backpacking trips were dope. Like I went on, you know, 10-day kayaking trips through the ocean, the San Juan Islands, or like did backpacking trips around Mount Rainier or whatever. Like they were a lot of fun, and there's a bunch of crazy stories from those. I finally, you know, eventually graduated and got out, and my parents put me into sober school, because in Minnesota here we have sobriety. We had Sobriety highs, which is like a high school for sober kids. And it's like, it's like kids that went through treatment and like their parents want somewhere to put them, or it's the place where you get sent to if you get kicked out of ALC for doing drugs. So like you can imagine the type of children that are there. If they're like already they get kicked out of public school and have to go to ALC, then they get kicked out of ALC, they go to Sobriety High. And then there was this house called the Phoenix House that also went to Sobriety High, and they took in juvenile gang members and put them. So like I was in class, and it's like there's like 50 people, 60 people in our whole school. It's just a high school, and half of them are gang members, and then the other half are like rich kids or whatever whose parents like put them through treatment, and like or there were kids that got kicked out of ALC. So it was a really like.
Did you like it? Did you feel like you fit in at this place?
Not initially, but later on I did. Yeah. So like the first like 4 to 6 months. And I was there with two friends of mine whom I'd known for my whole life, Joey and Dan. Dan and I went to White Bear together, and we became really close and played music together and blah, blah, blah. I also started playing music at this point in time, which is, that'll come into play later. So we were using the whole time. We were still using drugs like the whole time. And eventually I started also like really seeing my power and capabilities in this time, and that comes into play more later. But like one time somebody had found out that something happened, and like I ended up like devising this whole scheme in like a millisecond to like ensure that I would stay safe and I wouldn't get in trouble, and I like executed it perfectly. And I think in that, I wish I could remember the story, but I remember like feeling like, oh shit, like I can manipulate people if I need to. Like I really started seeing that I can get my way, if I need to. And so eventually we got caught. Somebody found out, and they told the teacher or the principal, and we were all sitting in group, and the principal comes out, and she's like, Joey, Dan, Christian, can you come in here, please? And we knew what was going on. We all looked at each other, and we all got up and left. We walked out the door. We knew what was happening. We're like, fuck this, we're done. Maybe there's 4 of us. But Weber, Dan, and I decided that we were going to run away from home. And we did. Like we were going to go to California, actually, funnily enough. And we pulled together money. And now keep it, like I wasn't doing hard drugs at this point in time. I was taking pills and stuff, but I wasn't doing any. And I'd done meth a couple times, and I'd done coke a couple times. I wasn't like doing hard drugs. We go to Weber's girlfriend's dad's house. Actually, it was her dad's mom's house, which was on Lake Minnetonka, and she had a guest house, a little cabin on the property that was like right on the lake where this Weber's girlfriend's dad lived at. And we ran there to like make the plan to like get to California. He was a meth head, like bad meth head, and it was just him and us. And he sold meth, and he had all these people coming in and out, and I like fucking loved it. I loved these. It was so interesting to me. It was I'd never seen anything like this. It was fascinating. It was also really fucked up. Like one day, this guy came over to buy meth, and he brought his daughter, and she was like 5 or 6 years old, and she was like blue because she was so malnourished and like pale, so pale that like all her veins were popping out, and she couldn't speak. She didn't know how to talk. This dude never like. It really, really hit my heart. And like, so I was like, they were doing meth in the bedroom and like doing the deal or whatever. And I like made this girl a sandwich and like tried to talk to her, and she like could barely speak. I also really saw what that life can be like, Yeah. So I started doing meth with this guy, and it was a really interesting week. He like threatened to kill me a couple times, pulled a gun on me, threatened to throw Weber in the lake and tie him, like chain him up and like chain a rock to him and throw him in the lake. And, we also knew like if we went back home, it would be back to treatment for all of us. Like we would have to go back to treatment. And like, we didn't want that. So we really wanted to get to California, but eventually it got too fucked up. And we decided like we'll call our parents and we'll go home. Like it wasn't going to happen. So we did. And it was immediate, like, you're going back to treatment. We've already talked to Hazelden, like you're leaving tomorrow or whatever. And so that night I stole my mom's car and went and got a couple bottles of Robitussin and drank them throughout the night. It's like going into treatment, I was gone. I was very dissoed out. And yeah, I went to treatment, and this is where the story starts getting different. This is kind of the next leg up or the next phase in the story. Because in treatment, I wasn't doing any hard drugs. I wasn't addicted to anything at this point in time. I was fucked up on Robitussin when I came in, but I told them that I had been using heroin and but what I did, and I don't know how this thought came to me or how I thought that I could pull this off, but I told them that I had been using heroin and that I used Robitussin for the past 7 days to get through the withdrawal, the majority of the withdrawal from heroin, but that I needed Suboxone. I needed them to give me opiates in treatment. And my drug test came back negative, of course, because I wasn't using fucking heroin. But somehow I convinced them that they were a liability if they didn't give me opiates. And I did this because I wanted to be able to continue to get high. Like, that was the only reason. But what it ended up doing was I needed to maintain the story for the remainder of the time. And that story meant I was going to need to go through withdrawal as I tapered off of the Subutex that they gave me. And I was going to have to show everybody that I was in withdrawal. I wasn't going through withdrawal. I wasn't using drugs prior. I wasn't addicted to anything prior to this, but I had to show everybody that I was. And so through this, I also started realizing, like, but man, the first time I went in treatment, all the heroin addicts, like the guys that were in there for oxys and shit, they were the coolest, like they were the cool ones. Like, they had the most experience. And like, so I knew this and I realized this. And it was like, I started like, I told this story that I was this heroin addict, and like this story developed. And of course I ended up becoming a heroin addict later in my life, but this story like grew and developed and evolved, and it got like pretty insane. But so like initially, like I get into treatment when I get on Subutex somehow. And as we're getting off of that, like I start going through withdrawal. And like I told nobody really knew about DXM much at this point. Like this is, 2004, 2005. I told them the story was that I was doing so much DXM that I was withdrawing from it, which actually maybe with the serotonergic stuff, like super high doses of DXM consistently, maybe you could go through some withdrawal. But I had counselors come up to me and tell me I was the worst withdrawal they'd ever seen anybody go through ever. Like, and it was all a fucking ruse. It was all a ruse, but it became not a ruse. It became real. Yeah, I caused it. Yep, it actually became real. It was really intense and fucked up and difficult. And it also like ended up turning into this like beautiful story arc of redemption. Cause like after a little bit of time in there, I started realizing like, well, I started getting powerful in treatment. Like kids started looking up to me, and like I had this story that like people really were interested in. And it was like, oh shit, people eyes are on me. Like people really are intrigued by me. Like, this is great. Like I like this. And so I started getting power. And through this, I realized like, and looking back on it, it's like the reason that I used drugs like that initially was, to numb and stuff, but really largely to fit in and to feel like accepted by some people. And I found acceptance more so than I had ever found before in this treatment center. And it was acceptance because of this story that I told. And this narrative also plays into the fact that like, it wasn't acceptance because of who I was. It was acceptance because of the story that I told. So I was still perpetuating this idea that I wasn't okay as myself. I wasn't okay as me. I had to tell a story for people to like me and love me. But I was ridiculously fucking good at it. I was good at it. I had everybody convinced. And this story developed and developed and developed to like some of the most grandiose shit you can imagine. Like I was the worst case anybody had ever seen. I had involvement with gangs. I had this part of the story in which like I was recruited into this group of people that funneled the drugs to the gang members. I was basically talking about the fucking Illuminati or like CIA, and not knowing that there's probably there's some truth to it in some sense. I obviously wasn't a part of it, but later on in my life, like I had to perpetuate this story for years, and we'll get into this a little bit more, but this is just indicative of like how deep I got into it. Later on in life, there was this guy I don't know who this is or how this happened, but like I told this story in AA meetings. Like, so like everybody fucking believe me, dude. I had a crazy life leading up to all this, you know, according to the story. But one day this guy, we get a call, my parents and I get a call from the police saying that somebody went in to the police station drunk, saying that they were a DEA agent and that they demanded to see my records and my files, everything that they ever had on me. We don't know who this was. We don't know why. It probably happened because I was telling this story and somebody like either didn't believe it. I don't know. Or it was somebody that like actually was involved in some of this type shit that I was saying that I was involved with, trying to figure out who the fuck I was and why I was telling this story. Anyways, my parents had to hire a fucking private investigator and security for me. And I almost went into witness protection. I don't know if I ever told you this. I almost went into witness protection. 16 years old. Yeah. And it was all because of this fucking lie that I told. But like I like perpetuated it for a long, long time because I had to, and because it gave me power. So I was in treatment, but then I started utilizing this for this intense love started coming back up again. So like while there was this dark story going on, there was also like the development of my spiritual side and this love and like the want and the need to help people and be there for people. Like when I left treatment after that 4 months, I wrote everybody a handwritten note. Like I was very personable and like I helped everybody. I was like really good at talking with people and helping them through their stuff and like being like a therapist or whatever for everybody. Like I was really good at groups. I was really good at I was good at the self-help thing. I was good at the improvement thing. I was good at like helping people come to the realization that they should be sober, or they should at least like try and make the best versions of themselves. Like I was fucking good at it. Like one time we ended up going to extended. There's like Hazelden, the regular program, which is a month long. And then some people, the first time I went to Grey Wolf afterwards, you know, which was in Washington. The second time I went into the Hazelden extended program, which is another 3-month program. And they're in the same building, but you don't like commingle or interact much. But I had heard that people in the primary program, there was a lot of like bullying and stuff going on and kids getting picked on. And like that had personal story for me. I did not fucking like it. And somehow I had so much pull in this place. Like I had so much pull. I got my counselor. This is something that they would never do, but I got my counselor to allow me to go give a talk to all of these kids in their first morning group to like try and get them to move past the bullying and stuff. So there's a group of like 30 kids whom I've never met. And I'm in there and I give this fucking speech and I wish it was recorded. I have no idea what I said, but I ended up getting all of the people that were bullying anybody else to give them a hug. And everybody was crying and the bullying stopped after that. It was a really fucking big thing. Like people were like, bawling and like the bullying stopped. And like, I remember afterwards when I left and they were all like cheering or whatever, I did like as I'm walking away, I like throw the peace sign up and don't look back, you know. Like it felt so good. It felt like it was amazing, but I really started to see how fucking powerful I was, you know. So I got out of treatment and I wanted to be sober. Like I really wanted to be sober. And I go back to Sobriety High and this story is developing more and more. And now in Sobriety High, I'm in there with gang members, like legitimate like kids who like have fucking killed people, you know, like, or at least that's the story that they tell. And like what I started realizing is that everybody started telling stories. And it felt to me like I was the hub of that. Like I was this energy vortex that like everybody now wanted to like tell their own story and like match me or like get as close to Christian as you could. And it ended up being like, not everybody in the school did this, but like a lot of people, they all like told these crazy fucking stories, you know, and it became this vortex of like kids trying to one up each other and blah, blah. But I was always at the top of it. And like, I knew that I like ran that school and it was awesome. But then at that point in time, we also started, we were missing a lot. We're missing a lot of like the dopamine hits, I guess we'll say. So we started doing vandalism really heavily. Yeah, we caused a lot of money in property damage, and it's really too bad. But it's just like it's indicative of like where I wasn't really better. Like I still had all the same issues that I had the entire time. Some things had changed, but like I still didn't know who I was. I still was inside this box that I created for myself. The box had expanded quite a bit, and the box was much more fulfilling than it had ever been. But I was still like trapped in this. I was still trapped, you know?
Yeah. So I want to dive just a little bit.
Yeah.
Real quickly, I want to dive I love your flow. I mean, you can just flow with it. I want to dive just a little bit into this phenomena of the storytelling, right? You kind of describe this weird, like, groupthink phenomena where it was like collectively, y'all are all telling a story, you know, but then like individually, y'all are all telling your own stories that all kept like getting heightening. And then like there was this competition involved. It's like a really interesting psychological phenomenon that I've seen played out just amongst like children in general sometimes, people in general, even adults sometimes. I see this played out sometimes within the psychedelic community of like needing to one up each other with like stories and play this psychedelic pissing match. It's something that I saw. It's a really common phenomena of going to jail or prison. Whenever, you know, I was in there, this is very common as well too. If people want to tell you all of their stories, and a lot of times it's like, it's so difficult because it's like, all right, if everybody in here is Jesus, you know, it's like, which one of us is Jesus? Do you know what I'm saying? And so like, we can't all be El Chapo. Do you know what I mean? And so like, why do you think you all are all telling stories? It's like an interesting psychological phenomenon. And I've asked myself that at times, like the jail thing and stuff like that. There was a real element of storytelling, you know? What do you think that is?
I mean, I think it's an ego thing, you know. I mean, for me, it was because it gave me attention and love, you know, like not necessarily like love, but like love in one of its forms, you know. It gave me attention. It allowed me to fit in, not just fit in. It gave me like, it didn't just give me a seat at the table, like the way that it gave me the seat at the table. And like, it was the first time in my life that I'd ever felt power or like people liked me and like I looked up to me, or like I never felt anything like that before. And it was based on a lie, and I think that was probably consistent with everybody that was doing it. You know?
Yeah. A lot of like what you're describing with that, it feels like you're asking yourself, like, why was I telling stories? Like, why were we telling stories? And a lot of like what you're describing, that feels like an external, like sort of reasoning for that, right? But I wonder, like within yourself, if you can, I know it's probably hard, but reflect back to that time. Like, what was it doing within you yourself? Was there any sort of reckoning with the fact and like even slightly brushing up against like, oh, I'm lying, you know what I'm saying? Or was there any like kind of mixed feelings like that within the process, you know? Because like I see what you're saying about others accepted me, I felt my power, things like that. I'm thinking about like just stories that people live in general, their lives, right? Like everyone lives their own story. And something I say to you a lot is sort of like this concept of living out your hero's journey. Everyone has their own individual hero's journey. We go on a little micro hero's journey, but like, what is the hero's journey about? You know what I mean? It's like this, it's somewhat like finding meaning. It's man's ultimate search for meaning, you know? And so like, I feel like somewhat guilty because I feel like throughout this process, I've been somewhat projecting on you and just like, here's what's coming through my mind. It's a blah, you know, but like, do you feel like part of the storytelling was like, in a way, searching for your own meaning, like within this world?
Yeah. 100%. You know, like the stories that we tell ourselves are what dictate how we act and how we behave. I became that person, even though I still had all these shadows that weren't being addressed. I still kind of became that person, but I so desperately wished that it was true because I knew that it wasn't, you know. I so wished that it was true. I also didn't really let myself look at that much. Like it would come up for sure. I stuck to it, dude. Like my mind was made, you know, like this is what I'm doing. But yeah, and particularly later on, I remember once I left sobriety high, which we'll get into in a little bit, and started using again, I started really contemplating this. Like, okay, now I have to unravel this story that I've told. Because it wasn't sustainable anymore. It didn't make sense to keep. I wasn't gonna like lie, you know. It didn't make sense to continue doing, and it took years to unravel. It was actually during benzo withdrawal that I finally wrote a huge long letter to my parents about a lot of things, but one of it was about like, yeah, all that stuff that we had to go through when I was like, I lied about that. I owe you $50,000 for a private detective that you had to hire, private investigator, when I had to almost go on a witness protection program. Although who knows, maybe that was a legitimate scare. So it took a long time to unravel it all fully. But it was a process that started pretty quickly that I started working on pretty quickly once I got out of treatment. But yeah, I mean, yeah, I desperately wanted it to be true because it was a cool story. You know, it was like I went through the hardest shit that anybody could ever imagine going through. Like I went through some hard shit, but like, yeah, the story that I told was very egregious.
So I'm curious if we've missed it at all within the timeline at this point yet. But when did we got some of your teenage history, the timeline with some of the drug use and stuff like that. When did you get prescribed benzos, man?
We're not there yet. Yeah, we'll get there. Okay. We'll get there. Yeah. So there's a couple other parts of the story that are maybe pertinent later on. So I'll backtrack a little bit. So Alana and I, you know, like she ended up going to treatment after I did and leaving SPA as well. And we like got disconnected, but we hung out a couple of times. And once we were hanging out and we stole Robitussin and peppermint extract. Peppermint extract's like 98% alcohol. So like when you're a kid, you can buy it legally. And you know, not to give any advice to anybody, you know, no minors should be watching this anyways. So like Alana and I, we didn't get arrested, we didn't get charged, but Alana and I got split up, and we didn't see each other after that for a long, long time. And that's a little pertinent getting into the story. Yeah, so I was in sobriety high, and like eventually we were like going to AA meetings like 3 or 4 times a week. Like I was sponsoring people. I had like 2 years sober under my belt. The school was kind of a ruckus. Like the education was awful. There was really no education for me. Like it was all stuff. We were learning stuff in my like junior and senior year of high school that I was learning in, you know, 5th grade and St. Paul Academy. So, and then there was, people were always joking and kids were, you know, interrupting in class. And like, it was really hard for the teachers there. Like they're all saints for having to put up with all that. But finally the school started getting really frustrated with this. And they decided that, I know now that they decided that they were going to try and fix it by making an example out of me. So like one day in class, like I made some joke that like interrupted the class, and the teacher was immediately like, go into the principal's office. And they ended up kicking me out. And I was a quarter away from graduating. So I was, you know, like really, really close to being graduated and being done. And they kicked me out. And funnily enough, that school apparently right after I left, a bunch of people started using again. And the next year that school fell apart and it stopped existing. So like, and then in my little ego as a kid, you know, I was like, I held that fucking school together. Like, sucks for them. They should have kicked my ass out. And there's probably some validity to that, but it was a funny little ego boost for me as well. But yeah, they kicked me out. And so in school, in this time frame also, like in sobriety high, I started playing music and we started making bands. And like me and a couple of the kids, Phil and I had a band, and my cousin Leonard, who was 11 years old, was playing drums, and he's a really great drummer. And we were playing shows and like getting assimilated, and we got signed to a record label. I don't know if I ever told you that, but I was on a record label at 16 for this like punk band, like small record label, but still it's kind of cool. And we would play shows all over Minnesota and stuff. Yeah, so I had this music stuff going, and then I started like after getting kicked out of sobriety high, I like dove into that, and we got into the punk scene in the Twin Cities and what they call the crust punk scene. So crust punk is like the lowest of the low, as far as like the punks would often say, like, yeah, I mean, it's like train hoppers, like heroin addicts, like alcoholics, you know, like beggars, people that, you know, panhandling, like that mentality and that ethos for that kind of scene. And then it's also like the most raw, aggressive, amazing music. Like I loved that as a kid. But so I started assimilating into this crew and going to all these punk shows, which are like, you know, basements, and there's like beer flying everywhere and people shooting heroin in the corners, and like they're really like full of energy and amazing, and I loved it. And I was there with, you know, Sam and a couple of people from sobriety high. I was maybe like 18, just turned 18 or something, and I had my first drink again after being sober for a couple of years, and it was amazing, and it was like psycho right back into it. But it also like it picked up quick this time. Like it started picking up quick. Yeah, so I got really into that, and I ended up getting my GED, and I placed in the top, like, you know, 0.1, 0.01 percentile for anybody doing without, you know, like I had a GED grading that could have got me into like really any good school if I really wanted to. I started getting into physics and quantum mechanics and spirituality. So like I was starting to dive into these hard drugs, also like starting to develop this spirituality, also starting to kind of unravel this story that I had, or at least maybe not unravel it, but stop like expressing it to everybody. And I found my place. I had a lot of anxiety at this point in my life too. Like I was the most powerful. I was the most powerful in my life up until now, when I was 16 to 18 in sobriety high. Like no other time in my life up until now was I like so powerful, such a powerful human being. That was, you know, an interesting couple years. And then at 19, Phil and I called Phil up and I was like, dude, I need to get out of Minnesota. Like I don't want to be here right now. And Phil had moved to Boulder, Colorado with Vince, another really, you know, I met Vince at the first day of kindergarten. So he was in Boulder and I was in Minnesota, and I called him. He was like, yeah, dude, I want to get out of Boulder too. So we decided to each pull out a map and have this map in front of us. And we were each going to, of the US, and we're each going to flip a coin on the map. And wherever the midway point, the city closest to the midway point that we, between our two coins, that's where we're going to move. And both of our coins landed on Portland, Oregon. So we're like, well, I guess we're moving to Portland. And it was like a few weeks. It took a few weeks and we got a place, and like I flew out there. I took a train out there, actually, I think. And Phil drove out there and I met him. And I remember like walking, I got in and Phil hadn't arrived yet. And I was just like stuck at the airport. So I just started walking through the city, and it was like so epic to me. It was such an exciting time. You know, there's like, Portland's kind of grimy, and like, I mean, but it was perfect. Cause like, that's what I started like really getting involved in, like the crust punk scene, or like the crust punk scene, like, these house shows are like in the fucking hoods, or we're simulating, you know, it's like, I liked that stuff. It was really fun. And it was different because I went to a private school, and I, you know, come from a big, you know, powerful family. Like that's another thing that we should probably get into a little bit, is the family that I come from. I went to Portland, and I also, another interesting thing to note is when I turned 18, I found out that I had some money. I found out that I had a trust fund. I didn't know about this. That comes, it wasn't nothing crazy, but it was enough. You know, but yeah, so we moved to Portland, and the first night in Portland after we got our place, we went to this punk show, this crust punk show, and it was Witch Hunt. It's a fucking awesome band. And the Portland scene was out of this world, man. It was so much more developed than Minneapolis. Like the shows were like 5 times, 10 times as big. We're at the show, and like I mentioned, I was really anxious at this point in my life. So like I wasn't good at talking to people, like, or at least approaching people. Probably I smoked a lot of weed. That probably contributed a lot. But so we didn't really like meet people much during the Portland trip. But the first night, this dude like gravitated towards us. Later, he told us like, he was like, I never go and introduce myself to people either, but something was telling me that I needed to talk to you guys. And this guy's name was Bobby, and he was a cool guy. We became friends with him and started going to his house and playing music with him and stuff. And we'd get drunk, and he had this drug dealer who was up with all the psychedelics and anything we wanted ever, all the drugs. And so we would play music. Neither of us worked. We would play music with him. We developed this band with this other guy named Chris. We'd do that 3 nights a week. And then the other days we would go and we'd climb mountains. Like this is what we started doing. So also the story is kind of all over the place, but I'm trying to get all of the info in there. I would go and visit Phil and Vince in Boulder prior to our move to Portland. And the first time that I did this, we went to the mountains and took LSD. And this is something that we started to do. We took LSD and we parked the car, and we just, in the middle of the mountains, we just picked one, that one. I want to go to the top of that one. And we go to the top of that one, and it'd take hours, you know, or whatever. And then we'd be at the top with triple balls, and we look and we're like, that one, let's go to the top of that one. And like looking back, it's crazy. Like, I don't think I could do that like physically anymore these days. Like we really exerted ourselves, because we would hit like 3 peaks in the day, and then we'd be lost and trying to find the way back to the car. And there's only one time where it got really dangerous. But so this was something that we started doing a lot. We would take psychedelics and go into the mountains and climb the mountains. And my spirituality really started to develop more and more and more. And I started to get into, you know, meditation. I was always kind of into meditation, but I started really getting into it and starting to study all this. Like I started learning, you know, about chakras, the third eye, blah, 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 trying to open my third eye, getting successful in opening my third eye. I would meditate, you know, for hours every day. I really started diving into to meditation and stuff. I also wasn't in Portland. I wasn't really using hard drugs. I think that's an interesting point to note as well. Mainly psychedelics and weed. Do some pills here and there. We spent our time hiking mountains, taking psychedelics, and playing music. That was it. And getting drunk. Like, that's what we did. And I would read and meditate. And it was awesome. It was amazing. It was a really, really lovely time in my life. Like, it was exciting. It was new. I was able to spend time in nature. We were playing really awesome music. We didn't play any shows out there, but the band that we were making was actually really good. In hindsight, a lot of my music from a child, like, I have some of it still. It was good. If you're into that kind of music, you know. I've told this story. I tell the story in the About Us section on the website, but Bobby's dad was a paranoid schizophrenic. And I know you've heard this story. And I've never known anybody to be as like out there as he was. Like, he would be gone for weeks at a time. And we just assumed he was like living under bridges and stuff. And he would come back like every couple weeks for a few days and be in the house. And he was always like talking to things that weren't there and like just being really random. And like, his hair was always crazy. His eyes were always bugged out. I barely talked with him at all in the whole 6-7 months that we were there. But one day we were playing music in the basement and Bobby's dad was gone. Like, he hadn't been there for a couple weeks. We're playing music in the basement and it's very loud. And all of a sudden we all look over and Bobby's dad's standing there. And he's standing in the corner like he just got down the stairs and he has a book in his hands and he's looking at me and we all stop playing music and he's just like bug-eyed staring at me. And I'm like, okay, you know, and he walks up to me and I like, you know, close the gap and he has this book and I got a guitar strapped to me and he has this book in his hands and he hands it to me. He holds it out and his eyes are wide and his hair is like, and he goes, they told me you needed to have this or you need to have this. And I was like, okay, you know, and I grab it and I set it down and we play music again. And then Bobby's dad leaves. He walks up the stairs and goes out the door of the house and I never saw him again after that. That was the last time I ever saw him. And that book was The Holographic Universe. And the Holographic Universe ended up completely. So a week later, we had friends out from Minnesota and we did what we always do. We took some LSD and we found the spot on the map. We picked the spot on MapQuest or whatever was around back then. And found this dope little lake and found this mountain and went there and took a bunch of acid and climbed the mountain. And on the top of the mountain, it was high up enough to be in the clouds. So we were inside of a cloud. And in this cloud, I could look at the sun and I could see the sun and it didn't hurt my eyes because it was refracted by the cloud. And I was just like staring at the sun and I couldn't recall. I think it was the first time I'd ever had an experience like that where you can actually just like stare at the sun. And during this experience, like the voice of God wasn't necessarily a voice of God, but like an extremely strong intuition came down that was like, you've gotten what you needed from here. You have to go back to Minnesota. Now it's time. I get these, you know, and I listen. Like, I don't not listen when you're in that state and those intuitions. You got to listen to those, you know. So I did, and somehow I convinced Phil. Phil didn't want to leave, but I convinced him that we needed to go back. And our friends were leaving within like a couple days, and we ended up breaking the lease and driving back with them. I also had gotten a cat in Portland, Spaz, whom I still have, whom I love. She's very old now, but that was another thing that I needed to get in Portland in hindsight. But it wasn't until like 6 months later that I started reading The Holographic Universe and read it. And it was like, oh shit, this is what you came. This was the most concise pathway to getting this book was you going to Portland. It's why our coins landed there. It's like, it all made sense to me. And the book completely changed the trajectory of my life. It showed me, I started seeing into the hidden science, we'll say, or the new science. And I started seeing what this world could look like. It was the first time that I ever started really seeing what this world could look like. And I started really envisioning what that might be and how I might have a role in bringing that to fruition, however, you know, small or large it might be. And I think another interesting point in this story is like throughout this whole time, ever since I can remember 3, 4, I have had this like extremely potent feel that like I'm meant to do something massive here. Like, I didn't know what that was. I have an idea now, you know, I didn't know what that was, but I had that with me throughout everything. And that it helped me stay alive during some of the darkest times, you know? Yeah. I don't know if I would have made it through what I went through at 13 if it wasn't for that drive. And I certainly would not have made it through benzo withdrawal if it wasn't for that drive. Like that's for sure. I know that for a fact. I went to school. After I read the book, I decided I needed to become a quantum physicist. And I was smart enough I could do it. You know, I knew that I could do it. And I went to college and I was doing a lot of drugs, and, you know, I wasn't doing hard drugs at this point again either, taking pills a lot, but nothing crazy. I couldn't be in like the rigidness of school. It just didn't work for me at this point in my life. And then the 08 housing crisis happened. I guess it was 08. So I was 18. So like maybe like a year and a half or 2 years before this. And at 21, I decided to drop out of school. And I met this guy named Matt. And Matt he was cool. He was like in his 40s, and, you know, he was twice my age. And he was in construction and had done a lot of interesting things in his life. He had the hot sauce company at one point, or managed a big hot sauce operation. Matt and I made this plan. Flipping houses was the new cool thing after the 08 housing crisis happened, you know. And so I had some money. And so we made a plan to start flipping houses. And so I dropped out of college, and we found the first house, and I bought it, and we flipped it. And we did all the work ourselves, just the two of us. And we hired on some friends and stuff to help, but he knew how to do all of it. It was really great. It was really intense. I was working 14-hour days, you know, 6-7 days a week. And we didn't make considering the amount of hours that we put in, we didn't make shit. But it was cool because we were like building an empire, it felt like. You know, we flipped a handful of houses, and the drug use started getting worse and worse. I started doing more and more pills. I started selling weed again. And I was just doing small amounts. I had a friend come into town once, and he was in town with a friend of his who I knew was like in California growing weed and stuff. And they were like, "We want to talk to you." Okay. And I was at one of my houses that I was flipping. This is the second house that I flipped. They come in and they have 11 pounds of weed. And they were like, "You're going to sell this for us." And I was like, "Okay." You know, I'd never done anything like this before. I was like, "Okay, we'll see." And they're like, No, you need to sell this for us in a week, or it's not going to be good for you. And I was like, "All right." I think they gave me 3 days. They're like, 3 days, or it's not going to be good for you. And I knew this other guy was like capable of some shit. So I was like, okay, like I'll see what I can do, you know? And I ended up selling all of them in 3 days, which was amazing to me. And like, it showed me like, if I put my mind to something and really try to do something, like I'm able to accomplish really whatever I wanted to. And that was consistent with the house flipping and stuff too. Like, I don't know how I pulled it off, but I did because I was convinced I was going to. But yeah, so I started selling, you know, lots of weed. And then that grew and grew and grew. And the houses, you know, they worked hand in hand. I was selling weed and flipping houses. And then Matt and I created a hot sauce company, which we called the Hot Sauce Lot, which is kind of a silly name. But we distributed hot sauce, and it was awesome. Like that's what taught me how to do, you know, sales and stuff. And like, I was really good at it. The guy who we were distributing for, like the first day, when he came to us at like a little expo thing that we were doing, and it was like teaching us how to sell it. And Matt told me that he came up to him afterwards. He's like, "Who the fuck is this guy? Like, how is he so good at this? You know, like I got that knack, you know, when I'm in that mode, I can do it really well." But yeah, so we had the hot sauce company for a while. Drug use was getting worse and worse. I was starting to dabble with harder drugs. I'd used heroin a few times, and I started injecting drugs. And I was good at it, man. Like I was very functional. I maintained my businesses. I maintained everything. None of my friends really knew. Everybody kind of knew, but none of them really knew. But yeah, so I was injecting drugs daily and flipping houses. And then we started getting our rental portfolio put together. And it's pretty interesting and crazy what we did and how we pulled it off. We would purchase a house using hard money. Hard money is very, very, very high interest rates. So because nobody wanted to give money to me, you know, like I couldn't go get a loan at a bank for like flip property. So we had to utilize hard money. Basically, like if we made one screw up, like we'd be fucked and lose the house and lose everything. And I would lose everything that I had built up. So it's big risks that we were taking. But we'd do it, and then we'd flip the house, we'd renovate the house, and then we'd refinance it and get a mortgage on it. And it would evaluate, you know, we'd increase the equity of the house, the value of the house, so we could not have to put a down payment on it. So we were basically getting houses for free. All we had to do was like fix it up a little bit, make it nice so that it could appraise it at a certain level, and we could get a mortgage on it and then put renters in it. So that's what we started doing. And we started building up this rental portfolio. And again, like every time we got a new house, we'd use our other houses as leverage. So if on the third house we fucked up and didn't get it done in the 6 months that we had or whatever, we would lose every single one of the houses because they were all utilized as collateral. So it was very risky, but I was all about it. I loved it. Then I became a realtor. I got my realtor's license and I started helping other investors do what I was doing. And then I met Ginger. And so I met Ginger and it was the second house. So I guess I met her a little bit before this, but it was basically instantaneous, instant connection. And she was moving to Colorado. So she left, but we stayed in touch. And eventually I had to go to Colorado for something. And we like spent a bunch of time together. We actually went to Schwango Live at Red Rocks. It was our first date, which was like the most epic show in all of human history. Schwango Live at Red Rocks, like the full on. So it was like Cirque du Soleil. I know we've talked about this. It's fucking unreal. Like anybody listening, if you want to see something crazy, search like the craziest show ever. Search on YouTube, Schwango Live at Red Rocks 2014. Like just the most epic show ever. But yeah, and then like eventually like I went and got Ginger and brought her back to Minnesota. The last time that I used heroin, I was in Colorado with her and I was getting into this new relationship and like I was doing heroin in the fucking bathroom and like I did not feel good about it. I didn't feel right about it. And so I knew about Kratom. I'd used Kratom a handful of times. And so I decided that I was going to switch to Kratom. And I did successfully. It wasn't fun, but like I did it. And I maintained a Kratom habit for years and years and years. But yeah, so the last time I ever did heroin was with Ginger in the bathroom, or was when I was with Ginger and like hiding in the bathroom to get my fix. But yeah, I brought her back and we, were madly in love and camped at my parents' backyard for 6 months until we got our own place. And I didn't have any flips at this point in time. I just had rental properties, so we couldn't like live in our rental properties. It was really lovely. It was really great. It was a really wonderful time. I was still doing hard drugs. I just wasn't doing heroin. I was still doing a lot of drugs. Yeah, it was a really exciting. Oh, and I guess we skipped the whole benzo stuff. So when I started flipping houses, after I got out of college and started getting into real estate, I never got prescribed to benzos, actually. Not once was I prescribed to them. Matt was prescribed to Xanax, and he would give them to me. And like I fucking loved them. I absolutely loved them. And then I found this like Pakistani dude on the internet who could like ship me bricks of Valium and Klonopin, like whatever I wanted for like fractions of a penny a pill. Like I was getting like 10,000 Klonopin at a time shipped from Pakistan, really dangerous stuff. And yeah, and I knew what I was getting into. I knew it. Like I knew how off. And like, when I tell the story about getting off benzo withdrawals, I say like, I didn't know what I was getting into, but I also did. I didn't. So like, I knew that I was getting into what people said was maybe one of the worst addictions out there and the hardest to get off of. But I didn't know how bad it actually was. I figured like, I got like good at getting off. I got good at like going up and down with opiates. Like I can deal with being sick, like I didn't know what I was getting into really with benzos, but I let myself get addicted immediately. Like I knew what I was doing. I was going to take these all day, every day because I loved it so much. And they helped me. They seemed to help me so much. Yeah. So Ginger and I eventually decided that we wanted to do this road trip across the country, and we left everything and Matt managed everything that we had. We went on a 5-month road trip across the country, which was one of the greatest times of my life, at this point in time. And we went to all the national parks and camped the whole way and, got a hotel once a week or whatever, stayed with family a little bit. And we were in like Washington or something, and Matt hits me up and he's like, dude, I met this guy and he has this business of like hard money lending, which is kind of like what we were talking about before. And he wants to work with us on brokering all these deals and blah, blah, blah. So I ended up coming, it was like, okay, this is what I got to do next. And I went back to Minnesota and we started this business where we helped, hook up all these investors with hard money loans and then flip their properties for them and get them. Like we started really growing. We grew something pretty cool. We were getting ready to do a 200 home deal when it all ended up falling apart a little later in the story, which is crazy to me. Like it was a multi-million-dollar deal. And I would have I would have owned 200 some properties in Minnesota if we did that. If we were to have done that, my whole life trajectory would be completely different. Like I wouldn't be here right now, you know, it would have been a different story. So thank God that didn't happen. But yeah, and a lot of this time period is blurry because I was on benzos, you know. Benzos, like, they make you really dumb and memory's awful. So the timeline might be a little choppy and stuff, but I'm doing my best. It was New Year's Eve 20. I ended up getting the house. This is fun. I ended up getting the same house that my mom and my dad got engaged in. I ended up owning it. And so Ginger and I lived in the same unit that my mom and dad lived in when they got engaged. When we got engaged, maybe not when we got engaged, but still, yeah. And it was in this house that one night we went to this like rave or something, and we met these guys, and they came over, and this guy I hadn't done any dissociatives at all, except for DXM and Robitussin at this point in my life. And this guy came over afterwards. He had 3-MeO PCP, and he also had ketamine, and he had GHB. He had all the stuff, you know. And so like we went into it, and I was like, holy shit, this is what I want to be doing. Like, this is fucking amazing. Like, and interestingly enough, we had him and another dude and his girlfriend or whatever over. That morning after everybody left, I go in my room and my drawer's open and all my money's gone. Like, I don't know how much money was in there, like thousands and thousands of dollars. All of it was gone. I was like, fuck, dude. And that was indicative of like, this is the karmic repercussions that you're about to get for going down this road, dude, you know, like, and it was what it was. I gained and lost a lot of money before. That's a fun, little interesting aspect of it. But yeah, so, and finally, like, we started getting into 3-MeO PCP and into other dissociatives and research chemicals. This was in the day where you could buy anything you wanted online. You know, any research chemicals were like open market, and like you could buy it on the ClearNet, and like there were plenty of sites that you could do it for. So we had all the crazy drugs. It was amazing at first. Like I was like the first like 6 months to a year of using PCP, I felt like a god. You know, I felt like a god. There's a couple things that we need to get into. One is the family. And then two, another thing is I started losing a lot of friends. Friends started dying throughout my 20s. You know, like I lost a lot of really close friends. My really good friend, I was at my cabin one day and Jack called me, and Jack was like, I knew he was doing heroin, he was doing meth, and he called me and he was like nonsensical and like a psychotic, you know, delusion or whatever, and telling me that people were out to get him and he needed to talk and blah, blah, blah. And it was the last day at my cabin. And I was like, dude, I can't do this right now. I'm sorry. You know, I can't do it. And then I go, and so like we didn't talk that night, and I go home the next day and I fall asleep at home, and I wake up in the morning to a call from his mom, and she was like, Christian, like I found Jack dead yesterday morning. And it's like, I talked to him the night before. And so that fucked me a little bit, you know, and I went, you know, as his pallbearer's funeral, and had, you know, a lot of really, really close friends died. I'm also really fortunate in the sense that I have like a really big core group of friends here in Minnesota, like people that I've known my entire life. And it's a big group. We're really fortunate in that sense. But yeah, a lot of people started dying. I also, yeah, so I think we should probably get into the family stuff. So first off, do you have anything that you want to bring up? I know this is all over the place, so I should have like bulleted this out so I could do it a little bit more chronologically, but it's okay.
I think we start diving into your family story too. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, cool. So yeah, we always went to these like family reunions and stuff growing up, and I didn't think much of it, you know, like, but they're big. They're at like really fancy resorts, and there's like hundreds of people there. It was just a part of my life, you know, like it wasn't something that I questioned much. In the family reunions, they always talk about, you know, Frederick and the industry that the family is a part of, which is the timber industry. So my great grandfather is Frederick Weyerhaeuser. So Frederick Weyerhaeuser was the Rockefeller of timber. Frederick was unbelievably wealthy, like the second wealthiest in the world at this point in time. Many people thought he was the wealthiest in the world. He built America. He built, and his wood built America, you know, but he was also a really good man. He wasn't competitive. He didn't like cut the throat of everybody that was, you know, competing against him. Instead, he worked with them and lifted all of them up together. He formed partnerships, he formed alliances. They called it the Weyerhaeuser Syndicate by the end of it. And it was this massive group where like nobody really knew everybody else except for Frederick. You know, Frederick just connected everybody and made all this amazing stuff happen. Yeah, and there's some really like cool Frederick quotes. Like one of them, you know, one of the ones that the family always talks about and perpetuates was like, this isn't for me. It's not for my children. It's for my children's children and for their children. And obviously that's something that like the descendants of Frederick, you know, hold near and dear. Another really interesting quote was when they wrote an article about him that was entitled "Richer Than Rockefeller." Like nobody knew what people's actual wealth was at this point in time. There was, you know, accounting systems and stuff. And this article came out and it was like big deal, big press or whatever, and claiming that Frederick was much wealthier than Rockefeller was. There's a quote of him talking, I believe it's to his sons or his kids, about this article that came out. And he says, "I don't think I'm the richest man in the world, but I think I might be the happiest." And like, that's just like a really, really powerful quote, you know, like really, really beautiful, powerful quote. And he was a forest man. He's a man of the trees. He's a man of the people. Really, really, really good human. And he's not discussed at all. Which is crazy because the way that he did business, I mean, it makes sense because the way that he did business is different than the way that they want business to be done. And plus Rockefeller designed the school systems. Like, of course he'll keep Frederick out, you know, but like, he's not discussed where you have Carnegie and Vanderbilt and Rockefeller that are talked about a lot. I also think that there's probably a lot more to that. I think he probably, you know, didn't join in the cult, we'll say. But yeah, so that's my family lineage. So we have a really, really big, powerful family with a bunch of really amazing people. That's very different than any other old money, old wealth family. It's super, super unique and it's very special. It's very like spiritual and it's, yeah, really, really wonderful, amazing people. And it's a really unique part of my story that I don't know how to translate to people, you know, like I don't know how to describe really fully like what it's like or what it's been like for me. But it comes into play, and it will certainly come into play in the story that you and I are living out right now, and that everybody that's listening to this is living out with us. Like it certainly will come into play, and it has been starting to come into play. Also really interesting to note, you know, and I think we discussed this on one of your Launchpad podcasts, but, you know, Frederick harvested trees for a living. Like he was the biggest tree dealer in the world, which I think is a funny way to look at it. But, you know, there are coniferous trees, pine forest, pine trees. Like where do Amanita grow? They grow in symbiosis with pine trees and coniferous trees. So like they're in some sense, it's like continuing that legacy with what we're doing now. And I started having psychics tell me, I guess we can get into this. I started having psychics tell me like 4 or 5 years ago that I'm the reincarnation of Frederick. And like, it resonates. It hits quite a bit for me.
You look like him. Yeah, I saw one picture of him and it was scary.
Yeah.
I was like, whoa.
Yeah. I mean, I am his descendant, you know. I have my own thoughts about that and I've had like memories and stuff, but then you get into like harmonic resonance and being a lineage. It's in my DNA. Like I could have memories regardless if you're tapped into that stuff. So I believe it, but yeah.
Epigenetics, and the more I learn about it, dude, it's fucking scary. It is really, really appalling how at the material level, scientifically, we're able to explain and point at this sort of like physical reincarnation that we can do through our own children. You know what I mean? And this passing on of things. But like, I think, I know you probably believe as well too, that it extends beyond this, any sort of materialistic explanations. I do think that there is a strong sort of spiritual aspect to it. You know, I know you haven't had any kids yourself yet, but like I've described that to you. I can feel that within them. I can the most, I don't know if I covered this in our episode together, but the most psychedelic experience that I've ever had in my life, man, the most powerful mystical moment that I've ever had, and I don't know if it'll ever be topped. It was the day Hudson was born. I was 17 years old and he had just been born. Megan had just pushed him out and she got to hold him temporarily. And then I held him next. And as I was holding him and looking at him, his eyes opened to the world for the very first time. And he looked directly into my eyes as soon as he opened his eyes. And this full body, I don't know if you want to call it Kundalini, whatever, man. This full body feeling washed over me. Hair stood up. And like, it was like in that moment, time stood still and it was infinite. Yet like it was a moment at the same time. And I knew there was this gnosis that washed over me that he was me and he was innocent. And like, I loved myself deeper than I ever have in that fucking moment. It was godly. So yeah, dude, like I probe a lot with the Frederick stuff and let you, but dude, yeah, you fucking are, man. Like you fucking are. Like we can scientifically point to that, but in my heart, I think there's a spiritual component to it as well, you know?
Sure. Yeah, for sure. Absolutely. And yeah, what a beautiful moment to share with your son. That's so cool. Yeah. So yeah, there's the family stuff, and it's, you know, it's interesting, but yeah, it'll come into play with everything that we're doing for sure. Back to the story that I'm bouncing all around with. I was doing PCP. There's so many little stories that, like, you know, obviously that make up this whole thing. One of them was in the early days of the PCP. I had a tenant die in one of my properties, and he was a homie. He was a buddy of mine, and he wasn't answering or whatever, and I ended up like going into his apartment and finding his body on the floor. And I was in the afterglow of a PCP, you know, journey the night before. I remember like touching his body. I don't know why I touched it, but I touched it, and I felt him move through me and go into the stars, you know, in essence, and like. And it like didn't, everything is so, it wasn't that it was numb. I was just, like I said, I was like really powerful in those early days. So like, it didn't bother me at all. Like it just was. And maybe like looking back, it maybe should have bothered me a little bit, but it just was. So at 21 or 20, before I started flipping houses, or maybe it was like right after I started flipping houses, I did DMT for the first time, and I had some friends come over, and we did, you know, we smoked it, and it took like, you know, the first hit, things starting to warp. The second hit, like really warping, like fractals, geometry, and it's, you know, it's so hard if you're doing the 3-hit method. It's so hard to get that third hit in. You're like, the lighter feels like it's like a light year away. You're trying to like get it into the bowl, and so I managed to do it. And I immediately go to the void. So, you know, black, nothingness, spaceless space, timeless time. Like there was time, but it was timeless. And there was space, kind of, but it was spaceless. And it was just me. And right when I get there, immediately I'm like, oh my God, this. Like, I missed this. I remember this. There was like an intense remembrance. And I was in this space for a while, just like really enjoying the peace and of like the infinite, you know, and the infinite as well as absolutely nothing. And eventually this woman came in to the scene, and she was like massive, like the size of the universe, massive, you know, and she was beautiful, and she was green, and she had this like beautiful long auburn hair. And since then, her image changes, you know, as through the story every time I see her, she might look a little bit different, but this is how I saw her this time. And she was like, and it was like, oh my God, it's good to see you again. And she was like giggling, and she said some stuff that I can't remember, but then she was laughing at me. At one point, she was like, look at you, Christian, like, look at this body that you're stuck in. You're so limited, you know. She was kind of like prodding, like, silly human, like, it's got to suck being so limiting, you know. And like I knew her and I remembered her, and it was so good to see her again. And a bunch of information was exchanged that I can't recall, but eventually she started, and like, I guess I had a body in this space, like an etheric body or something, but she separated my consciousness from my body. So I was like way over here and my body was over here, but I could still feel everything that was going on with my body. It was almost like I had split perception. Like I was with my body, but I was also over here. And she started, the best way I can describe moving in this spaceless space is swimming. So she was like swimming in this spaceless space, and she would go into my heart. She would do a loop and come into my heart. And when she hit my heart, like everything would light up. And then she'd come out the backside and do another loop the other way and come into my heart. Everything would light up. So she was making an infinity sign with my heart being the node in the center. And she started doing it faster and faster and faster and faster and faster until she was doing it essentially at the speed of light. So I was just like constantly lit up, and it was overwhelming. It was really intense. And I was like, what are you doing? In shock. And she said, I'm cleaning you of your impurities for your upcoming mission. And I still, every time I say that, I still get chills, you know, like And I was like, okay, like, sounds good, thanks. And that was it. That was the end of the experience, or that's all I can remember. But I remember afterwards being like, it felt like I had been kissed by an angel, it felt like I had been touched by the most divine. And I was just like elated for a good few weeks. And it opened up the door to a whole new realm of existence that I had heard about, but hadn't quite experienced. And so DMT became a big part of my story. And when I was utilizing heroin and selling a lot of weed and drinking, I had a friend that was making a lot of DMT, and he'd sell it to me for super cheap. So I had ounces all the time on hand, and I was just like smoking it every night. And I had a lot of really incredible, amazing experiences, a lot of really weird ones too, that like, cause I was using drugs, so like I wasn't like really in alignment with it, but I had a lot of really profound ones. And she was always there. Every single time I did DMT, she was there. If she wasn't the one like guiding the experience, or like, programming my body, or like showing me what my future was going to look like, or whatever, she was at least there in the background. Like I could always sense her. And I had some really profound experiences that started shaping the trajectory of my life. And so one of them, I smoked it and I don't remember exactly where I was, but there was this, she was there. She was in the distance this time though. She was just kind of watching. And there was this guy there, this like cloaked figure, this like wizard looking guy. And he had a big staff with a crystal ball on the tip of it. And we must have exchanged some information. I can't remember, but he touched this crystal ball to the top of my head, and it like lit up with gold, like radiant gold light. And he took this staff and he tapped it on a globe, on like a globe of Earth, like a map of Earth or whatever, a globe. And he touched it right on Minnesota. And this Minnesota started like spreading this gold light. And this gold light started spreading all over the earth. And now looking back on it, I wonder if like maybe Minnesota started glowing and then other places popped. Maybe like California started growing as well, like in its own little node. I can't quite recall, but yeah. And then eventually the whole world was covered and suffused with this golden light. And Tara, the green woman, was in the background just kind of like watching this, smiling. And he goes, "This is what you're meant to do here." And I was like, okay, cool. Sounds good. I've always had this drive and this like feeling that I'm supposed to do something really big here, like really, really big. And it started like putting validity to these thoughts and these queries that I had about like how that might come about, or like if it was real, or if it was just a delusion or whatever. Like I remember even like when I was maybe 18, 19, walking with a friend, and like he reminded me of this story in my 20s, and I told him like, "I'm gonna change the world, dude." And he was like, "What?" And I was like, "Yeah, I'm gonna fucking change the world." Like, and I knew it. Like I knew I was going to. So it was always something that I knew. But then like the extra, the extra dimensional realm started showing me this too, or validating it. Now I also was very aware that could just be a reflection of what I had felt, my whole life. Like maybe it wasn't real. Maybe it was just like maybe it was like my brain and my consciousness creating this stuff. So that was something that I battled with for quite some time. And I don't battle with it still, but it's still something to be thought of, and pondered. But yeah, and then I was utilizing DMT. I was abusing it. I wasn't using it properly. I was getting drunk, and then like every night doing heroin and smoking DMT. And I started just like, I never had a bad experience though. They were all just like weird or not spiritual, just like bizarre. And she started like not being a part of them more and more. She was like, this is stupid, stop being an idiot Christian. And eventually I had one experience where I took the second hit, and instead of like kaleidoscopes and fractals and geometry, it was black smoke. And this black smoke started like enveloping my body. And for some reason I was like, cool, like, let's take the third one. Being an idiot. And I take the third hit and I lay my head back on the bed rest and like immediately go into this scene. I was in this cellar, this like dungeon, and everything was black and white, cobblestone dungeon. And there was this little girl, like 5 or 6 or 7. And the only color in this scene was her eyes, and her eyes were radiant blue. And everything else was black and white. And I was her guardian angel. And I knew that, like, she was mine to protect. Like, I was tasked to be with her through her life and take care of her and help guide her. And eventually, like, at the top of this cobblestone staircase, there was this big double wooden door, and this door was like burst open, and these two demons came into the scene, and they were flaming demons. And so there was more color in the scene now. It was red, like they were red and hues of red and orange, and her eyes were blue, and that was everything else was black and white. And it happened in like a millisecond. Like, they burst in, and then all of a sudden they run down to her and start ripping her up in front of me and like taunting me, like, nothing you can do, like, we fucking got her. She was mine to protect. It was unbelievably traumatizing. Like, and they were like, I mean, it was fucked up, dude. They were like raping her and ripping her up and like pulling her eyes out. And like, you know, they started like taunting me with her body parts and shit. And yeah, unbelievably fucked up. And finally, like, I managed to snap out of it and stand up in the room, and like there's black smoke everywhere. And I'm like walking in circles, yelling to Tara. I was like, I get it. I'm sorry. I get it. I understand. Like, I won't fucking do this anymore. I'm sorry. I get it. And I did that as long as I could until eventually, like, the black smoke got me again, and I fell on the bed. And, you know, the DMT tunnels, like, you go through these crazy geometric tunnels sometimes to get to the realm that you're going to. Well, I went through one of those tunnels, but instead of me going through it, it was going through me. So the tunnel was going into my third eye, and everything in the tunnel was being pushed into my system. And instead of crazy geometry and fractals, it was broken teeth and bones and guts and blood and organs, like, being pushed into my body and into my energy field. And like, eventually it ended, and I was fucked up for a long time after that. Like, that fucked me up. And I didn't do DMT for a long time after that. Like, there was entity, must have been entity attachments. Like, I was fucked up. There was like this weird dark like goo that was like enveloping my energy field. And like, I've always been able to feel energy and stuff. So, like, I can feel my aura, you know, like, it was like tainted, you know, I was tainted and it took a long time for it to go away.
Yeah.
That's
a really interesting story. I do think you've told me that story before, but you know, it's like with the DMT thing in particular, that's a trend that I've noticed is there's very few people who start on the DMT path and continue on it who don't at some point hit something similar to what you're describing. I've experienced it. I have a whole video talking about probably the darkest experience of my entire life, the scariest experience, and it was due to DMT. Do you know what I mean? And like, this is a very common thing that within the DMT community, they tell you, hey, dude, at some point, if you keep doing this, you know, at some point, almost everybody brushes up against this. Do you know what I'm saying? Yeah. And it's so, I think there's a spectrum to like why that happens. You know what I'm saying? I think there's both an element of like we can cause it ourselves, and I think there's also an element of like not everything's fucking up to us. Do you know what I'm saying? So with you having this negative experience with DMT, do you think it was something similar to what I just described? It was like simultaneously both. You were kind of like shutting yourself out and realizing and brushing up against your own reckoning with like your relationship with it. And then also simultaneously, Tara is recognizing this and feeling this. And it's like, no. Yeah. Like, talk about like that, the blocking, getting blocked out, the DMT negative phenomenon a little bit.
It was a lot of things. It was showing me that I was being a fucking idiot. That was a lot of it. Like, I wasn't using it properly. It was setting the tone for how I was going to utilize DMT later in my life. Because after this, I used it once, like within a year or two, and I had another really dark, fucked up experience. And that one actually stayed with, it wasn't as fucked up, like as traumatic, but the after effects were worse than the one that I just outlined. Like, it stuck with me longer. There was more black gunk. Like, I was really not well for like a year after that. Not like fully not well, but you know what I mean? Like, there was a darkness over me for like a year after that. So yeah, ensuring that I didn't go back and didn't keep being an idiot. I was abusing the medicine, and it was going to show me, you know, it was going to slap me. That was part of it. She slapped me. Yeah, like I said, setting the tone for how I was going to utilize DMT in the future. Because nowadays, I only use it when I see her and she's calling me in. So like, I'll see Tara, and I'll see her in meditation, or I'll just feel her very intensely. But if I remember feeling her really intensely, if I go into meditation, I can see outlines of her, and often she'll be like, come here, like, come on in, it's time. Yeah, we'll get into those stories in a bit too. But
it's really interesting. I've fallen into a similar place, and I've described it to you. It's something that like I fell into kind of by trial and error, by like taking other people there as well too. But I feel like it's very almost important to first of all adhere to the sort of callings from them in general, but then also like ask for permission in a way, and I don't project that onto others as if I think everybody needs to do that, but I'll say if I'm going to fucking do it, or if I'm going to do it with anybody else, I'm going to ask for permission. I think like you can ask for permission kind of like what you're describing, maybe in a meditative sort of way. The way that I typically ask for permission is in a meditative way in combination with a microdose, not a full blast off, but a little microdose of the DMT.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, I do that too. Yeah, like I'll take a single hit or a half hit, and if I don't get that darkness, then it's like, okay, you're good to go, Or if it's like, you just kind of will feel like, okay, it's okay to use, or it's not okay to use. Yeah, so the DMT story is fascinating, and like it's obviously much more in depth than all this, and then it gets to be much more in depth after this part of the story, where like finally when I start using it properly and intentionally, that's when it's really started to show me a lot of things. But that comes into play a little bit later. So yeah, we covered the family and the DMT stuff. During the PCP time, I developed a really strong God complex, like thought that, savior, blah, 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 all this shit. And that's very common with dissociatives with people. Like ketamine causes God complexes in people. And I think a lot of people on the spiritual path, for instance, like really believe that they're like Jesus at some point, and we're all Jesus, we really are. We all hold that harmonic frequency. And like, so like, it makes sense why people tap into that. But like, I went through that part of the story as well, which was important for me to go through and learn from and understand. And that really happened largely on PCP. I got this big God complex. It also led to some really important things. Like I ended up giving a speech in front of my family at a family reunion. And I think I found that video. I'll share it with you at some point. It's pretty interesting. But I give this speech totally unorthodox about like about spirituality and how like, I'm the family shaman and blah, blah, blah. And like, I'm here to like, mind you, I'm giving this type of speech in front of a room of like my family members who are, millionaires and billionaires and stuff. It was a very, very like ambitious thing for me to do. It was a beautiful speech. I wrote it out on PCP and it was fucking awesome. And had I not been doing PCP at this point in my life, I would not have done, no way I would have been able to get up on stage, but I did not give a fuck, like, and I knew that I had to do this. There was also like, I was really tapped in a lot of aspects. It was something that I had to do. And that speech will come into play later in life. And it actually has started to come into play again in the past like few months, which is interesting. I just had a family reunion, a few months ago. And I was asked multiple times about that speech, which was interesting because I had not been asked about it, the entirety of the 5-6 years prior, or I guess it's been 8 years now. But now all of a sudden I'm in this new place, like it's getting brought up again. And I'm able to like eloquently, navigate that territory at this point. So it'll come into play later. But it was a really powerful speech and about Frederick and about the family and like the family's potential and capability and how like we have the capability to really change the world and so on and so forth. And afterwards, like a lot of the family was shocked, like what the fuck? And a lot of the family really got it. Like I had one of my cousins at the end, like right when I finished, she like jumps up and is like, cousin Lucy wants to give you a great big hug, and like runs up to the stage and gives me a hug. Nobody does that shit at these things. It was a powerful moment for me. Things were really interesting on PCP initially, but then it all started to fall apart bad. Like the benzo use got way more. I would, you can't sleep on that stuff. So every night I would just pop a bunch of benzos, and like what I started doing was having Everclear on hand, and I would make a pickle shot, a good amount of Everclear in a glass, probably like 6-7 shots worth of alcohol with pickle juice, and then down it and then go run to bed and try to fall asleep. Very, very bad for the body and the system. And I was super addicted to benzos. And still on kratom and taking opiates and stuff, just not doing heroin. Yeah, it started to really start falling apart. I wasn't able to do work. I got fat. You know, I was still playing music. I was still in bands. Looking back at some of the videos of me like playing drums on stage and stuff, dude, I got fat, man. It's crazy. I didn't think that I was fat like that, but like looking back, it's like, bro, what were you doing? And eventually, and you know, Ginger and I, like, things started to get a little bit more tricky and difficult. We ended up getting married in 2018. So I was in the midst of all this, things like kind of starting to fall apart. And like, we couldn't plan the wedding because we were so fucked off. Like, so like my parents had to really plan the wedding. It was a beautiful wedding. It was amazing. We were so not with it that like we couldn't even be a part of planning it. Once we got married, we went on this road trip, and I had started and brought our dog with, and I had started at this point playing around with research chemical benzos. That's dangerous territory to get into. And there was one in particular called clonazepam that was stupid strong, like micrograms strong. So like you have to make volumetric dosing of it. And like, you know, it was extraordinarily euphoric and powerful and extremely addicting. It jacked my tolerance up like crazy. So I got up to the equivalent of like, what would be the equivalent of like taking 10, 12 plus milligrams of Xanax or Klonopin a day with this clonazepam stuff. And finally, like it was after this trip, the end of 2018, that it was really starting to be like, okay, we got to figure this shit out and clean this up. New Year's Eve of 2018 was the last time that I did PCP or any of the research chemical drugs that we had. And Ginger and I did it, and I had Phil come over, and I gave him everything. And I was like, lock this up and don't ever give it. He was like, throw it away if you want, lock it up and don't ever give it to me. Even if I ask, don't give it to me. And Phil stayed true to his word. I found out a couple months ago that he still has all that stuff. He's still everything that I gave him. Yeah. So like he's got.
Wait, does he have your fucking PCP?
He's got everything. There was a bunch of stuff. Yeah. There was a bunch of like MMC and fucking 4-DCK and whatever, like all this stuff. Yeah.
4-FDCK.
4-FDCK. Yeah.
Shit,
all
dude.
this stuff.
Okay, no. So I know he says he won't give it to you, but will he give me the goddamn PCP?
Maybe, yeah, maybe. I can talk.
I'm just joking. Allegedly.
I mean, it is legal. Actually, I don't know if it's legal. 3-MeO PCP. I don't think it's legal anymore, but it was at that point in time. But yeah, so Phil took it all, and so like, you know, we went into the new year in 2019, like being done, and I quit kratom very quickly after that. And I actually utilized ketamine to quit kratom, which, you know, at least we got rid of the research chemicals. We used a much more well-known research chemical for it, or chemical. And that actually, it worked really well, being really high on K while getting off kratom. It works. You don't really go through much withdrawal. It was getting hard with Ginger and I. Like, it was getting much more difficult. We still were so in love. We were out of the fairy tale love that we had for like 4 or 5 years, even though I was using and blah, blah, blah. Like, we had like a fairy tale like love. Ginger and I, this is an interesting story. It's a fun one. When I went to go pick her up in Colorado, I don't know if I've ever told you this. I hadn't seen her in a long time. Like, we'd only really hung out a couple times. Like, I had that time in Colorado for a couple of days with her before. And then really we just met in Minnesota. So we maybe hung out for like 3-4 days at this point. But we were like madly in love and talked all the time, you know. And we were so excited to see each other. And I drove to Colorado. I actually went to meet her mom. Just like, I was very brazen about it. Like, I went to go meet her mom, having only met Ginger like a couple times prior to this. I went to go meet her mom and tell her, like, I'm going to go pick up your daughter from Colorado and blah, blah, blah. And she gave me her van to go do it. She was really cool about it. But so I was driving her mom's minivan, and 14-hour drive to get to Colorado. And then I get there and there's all this traffic to get to her. So it ended up being another like handful of hours. And then there was this on the drive, you know, to Colorado Springs, there was this like beautiful rainbow that popped up, and it was all really like divine and cool. And then finally I get to her, and it's nighttime, and she like comes outside, and we like hug, and there's so much energy, and we're so excited. And we get into the car, and I pull out and pull onto the street. And right when I pull onto the street, we're just like, there's so much energy, and we're looking at each other and talking. And the minivan, the sliding door passenger window goes and fucking spider shatters. Nothing happened. It was the energy. The energy made the window explode. And like that was a really interesting story. And that tied into my story later where I was like, when Ginger and I were going through our separation and divorce, where I was like, she's my twin flame and blah, 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 you know, and it made it, that my attachment made it much, much, much more difficult. Attachment's probably another thing that we should get into more, but we'll move there because that's a big part of the story and everybody's story, really. You know, the relationship started falling apart more. Withdrawal was hard. I had planned for a long time to get off benzos, and like that whole year, and finally like it came time to do it. And I found this group that was doing what they call a rapid phenobarbital taper, because like I didn't want to taper. I'd been tapering this whole year. Like I got my benzo stuff down from like that 12 milligrams a day to like 3, which was the level that I had been at for years and years prior to that. And that was fucking hard. Like that's why Ginger and I were struggling, because I was so anxious and terrified and angry always. Like, and so like I was really hard to deal with. And like she reflected me, so she started spiraling and stuff too. And yeah, fine. Like, so I didn't want to keep tapering. I was like, I'm gonna fucking kill myself doing this, or it's gonna kill her. Like she started getting really depressed, and so we found this group that did a rapid phenobarbital taper. And what it is basically they put you on a super high dose of phenobarbital, which hits the GABA system for 3 days, and you stop taking your benzos the first dose that you take of phenobarbital. And then phenobarbital has a really long half-life. So at the end of the 3 days, it's super built up in your system, and it takes weeks to fully get out of your system. And what it does is it negates or mitigates the risk of seizures. So it makes it so you're not going to seize out and die. But what it also does is it shocks the system because you quit benzos immediately. So like the brain, instead of like the slow taper, the brain doesn't get nearly as much brain damage. You know, when you just quit it, like fucking tons of brain damage. So yeah, but I didn't know that, you know, I just like wanted to get off of it. So I did this phenobarbital taper. We started on September 16th and then September 19th of 2019. So September 19th, which is my half birthday, which is interesting in the timeline stuff, was my first day without any GABAergics. And then that was the beginning. The dark night of the soul kind of started, you know, prior to that, but that was the beginning of the most difficult time period in my life, which spanned for 5 years. And really, as nobody knows that has been, you know, following us or a part of our business or part of our family or community, it really extended. This dark night of the soul extended until like 6 months ago. So the most difficult, you know, growing this business, I've grown it entirely while being in the midst of the most difficult time period in my life. You know, I didn't show that, but I've gone through a lot of chaos and turmoil and heartache and pain, more pain, significantly more pain, like infinitely more pain than what I went through when I was 13, 14. That's the beginning of the story that a lot of people know some of, but we're going to get into it a lot more. But I think we'll have to save that for another time.
Yeah. But yeah, dude, this has been really spicy, really interesting. I do think that second episode, and honestly, it's great timing with the whole rebranding and relaunch things coming up. Yeah, it'll be great. Wow. I think, you know, I feel like there was so much of that I knew, but there was a lot that I learned about you today, buddy. Really, how I think I want to leave this episode off today. It's a lot that we've talked about, a lot that we've learned, a lot that we're going to kind of talk about once we continue this conversation. But something I want to like hone in on to kind of close this out between the two of us is the Frederick energy and how we're bringing that into this vehicle, right? I mean, do you want to speak to that for a minute? How we're bringing the Frederick energy into the vehicle?
How about first, why don't you express how you think and see that being brought in? Yeah, I'm curious first.
Yeah, no, I think it's interesting whenever you were describing the vision that you had of, it was, you know, the DMT vision, and you saw Minnesota and you saw this sort of like golden mycelial network, right? And whenever we were creating the logo for this podcast, I was like workshopping up a bunch of stuff. And that was ultimately what we ended up deciding on. I created this one with the kind of the Amanita logo with the kind of like golden mycelial network, DNA helix coming through it. But ultimately, like, I think, you know, something that I asked you within this conversation was like, do you think in a way that you were searching for meaning, right? Like, do you feel like whenever you were telling these stories and you're building up these stories, do you think that you were searching for meaning? And I think ultimately that's what like most of us are trying to do within this life, is make meaning out of it, for good or for bad, right? We're like trying to make meaning out of it. What the fuck are we doing here? And I think that there's certain aspects of business within this Western world that I'd love and really wish to change. You know what I'm saying? I think that too often people see business as like a particular company, a way that they make money, even like a certain vehicle, right? Like I refer to our business as a vehicle. But ultimately, like, what is your business, man? Like, your business is the accumulation of the entirety of your life of what you contribute to the world, right? That's what I think your business is. Like, mind your business. That's your business, is how the world is reflecting back to you. And I think that the way that I've kind of envisioned it and felt into it with the Frederick thing is like, in an earnest attempt to actualize on this, right? And have meaning within this life and to contribute to the collective, like, oh, what better way than to build up the collective with you? And you also simultaneously know that the collective is going to reward you in the process of building up the collective. And the flaw that I think a lot of people fall into within this sort of business world in this Western society is not being able to break out of the sort of indoctrination and fear that has been instilled with us, and it gets reflected into the business that they build, right? There's this kind of like protectiveness and this like greed and this fucking like this scarcity mindset, you know? And I think that the business and bringing the Frederick energy is like honoring that, the opposite of that, and breaking through that programming. You know what I'm saying? And it was so funny to me that that Frederick was the quote unquote second wealthiest man in the world at the time, maybe the wealthiest, right? He was up there against the fucking Rockefellers. You know what I'm saying? And like, at this time in history, everything that's like coalescing and what like a lot of the landscape, people are starting to wake up and realize there truly is that this dark thing that has had a lot of grasp and control over the world. But ultimately, when you look at most people, most of us aren't that. It's just that collectively, we've all allowed Satan in at these little moments. We've all like compromised at times and not chose the higher. And so collectively, it's created this kind of Satan thing. So like, what is the way to kind of combat a collective Satan thought form, tulpization, egor that we've all created together, right? It's to create the opposite collectively. It's to create the mycelial network. Yeah, that was just a big fucking brain dump there. But what does your heart tell you about bringing Frederick's energy into the business?
Yeah, he did things in a way that nobody else did them with that scale of business, potentially with any other business ever. I don't know. I don't know the story of a lot of other. It's hard to say, but I mean, I think it's back to, you know, this concept of sacred commerce. You know, like, and it would make sense that it's the person that's doing things with the trees. He's the one that would be more in line with sacred commerce than the person like drilling for oil or making steel or whatever. It just makes sense. But in my mind, like he was almost like an ascended master, you know. I kind of view him as that, as like an ascended master that came in to set up something new. And it was almost like a blueprint for the way that business could be done. And the timing of it is really interesting, the Industrial Revolution and whatnot. But then, you know, like I have interesting insights into like how it was operated. There are some books out there for anybody that's interested. Like there are autobiographies or there are biographies, and it's a really interesting story just because he was such a beautiful, well-rounded human being. But I think like it comes back to like, you know, the ethos and the energy behind. I think a lot of it's energy. Like that man had a force of energy behind him, you know. And I think that we have that energy too. Like we have. I don't even know how much energy we have backing us, you know, like it's hard to put in. We have Tara for sure. And we have all these other entities, like, but there's like an ocean and mountains and like of energy that's like behind our backs at all times. And for me, I think it's probably similar with him. It was the more in line we can be and exist and operate, the more that energy is going to come through. And I feel like that energy's kind of just been waiting to come through, and like, it's up to us to like let the flow bring us to the place where we're able to like open those floodgates. And I think that he probably, got to a place to allow him to open those floodgates. I also think that like, we've discussed this, but any individual that has a large role in the world, they're an individual. Yes, they're making their own decisions, free will, blah, blah, blah. They're also a collective manifestation of the world, where it's at, the energies of the world. And I don't know if Frederick was necessarily as much of a collective manifestation of time is non-linear, time is simultaneous. I don't know if he was as much a collective manifestation of where the world was at that point in time, as much as he was a collective manifestation of where the world's at now. But to shift and to move in the direction that we're hoping to help bring the world, we needed a piece like him back in history to kind of like pave the way and write the blueprint. That's another discussion, but I think that we are largely bringing through that energy. I also think that it's stuff that more is going to be illuminated as time goes on. Because like, I really don't know fully, but I do know that I feel like extraordinarily connected to him. And the larger we grow this and the more that things start falling in place, the more I'm seeing like his energy coming through. And some of that is like being in alignment and watching the people come into our lives that like are really setting us up for massive success or to do really big things. And I think that's probably a lot of what I'm sure, like if you asked him about his story, as opposed to getting like the biographies, I'm sure a lot of it would be like crazy synchronicities that happen that just like lined him up with like he happened to live next to James J. Hill, who was one of the railroad tycoons in the country. And James J. Hill, the reason that Frederick ended up becoming so wealthy was because of one deal that he did with James J. Hill. It was the biggest deal ever at that point in history. And he purchased like millions of acres in Washington for like $4 an acre or something like that, because James J. Hill, it was mutually beneficial for both of them. That wouldn't have happened without him just happening to live next to James J. Hill. Like that, the odds are unbelievably astronomical, like, so it's things like that too. Like, but that's that energy coming through. And that's also like, these higher intelligences and entities that, are able to kind of like pull strings here. Like, so I'm sure he was Tara, he was very connected with Tara as well. And so, yeah, I don't know. It's a deep conversation, and we can go into a lot of stuff. But.
Yeah. Something I heard you say the Frederick story a few different times. We talked about him at different occasions. I think one of my favorite things you've told me about Frederick, it sticks out and kind of like brings this like little internal glow and smile every time I hear you say it. But it's whenever it's that quote where he says, "I'm not doing this for myself, for my kids. It's for my kids' kids." And like,
yeah,
I think like he was being so sincere when he said that. I think he absolutely was talking about you, the rest of the family, but I think he was ultimately talking about the collective. You know what I'm saying? Like kind of what he was saying that, and like, I think that's another like sort of energy that's going to be lived on through the business and the vehicle. You know what I'm saying? Is we're doing this for our kids,
Yeah. And that's like, we talk about this all the time. None of this is for us. Like, yeah, we're happy to get money from, like, of course we're running a business. Like, we want to live nice lives. Also, like, the more room we have to navigate as a business and personally, like, the more work we can get done. So like, if we have more money, we're able to operate better. But like, we're not doing this for ourselves. We're not. It's just like, sure, part of it is sure, but we're not doing any of this for ourselves. And that I feel like is well known amongst everybody that interacts with us, and that's part of our community. Like, this is for, and I say this, and I maybe don't say this enough, but like in that last video that I posted, at the end of it, I was like, talking about the move to Los Angeles and stuff. I was, I thanked everybody, and it's like, look, like, this has never been me. It's never been you. It's never been the team that we have. And I look in the camera and I'm like, it's you. It's always you. And that's because it's everybody. This is what we're doing is for the world. I think we both know that that's going to become even more and more apparent and obvious to everybody, ourselves included, as we continue progressing down this path. Yeah, none of this is for me. None of this is for my kids. Yeah.
Yeah. It's beautiful.
I think that's a great place to end it off, buddy.
I agree. Yeah, I agree. Cool. Appreciate you, dog.
I appreciate you, dude. I love you, dude.
I love you too, man.
Thank you for listening to the Amanita Effect Podcast. Please like us, share, subscribe, and get in touch